passing on June 27, 2019, the Securing America's Federal Elections Act, which authorizes $600 million to modernize and secure our election infrastructure, mandates the use of voter-verified paper ballots and post-election risk-limiting audits, and bans internet accessibility and connectivity for devices on which ballots are marked or counted. Now, perhaps they forgot about it because all of them voted against it, except for one Republican, and the entire Democratic caucus voted to support it. We are still hoping that Mitch McConnell decides to take up that legislation. So who are the useful idiots? I suppose we can have an interesting conversation about that later. Mr. Lewandowski, you told Mr. McClintock some of the things you might want to investigate about the deep state when you become a U.S. Senator. Let me ask you something else about your upcoming service as a senator. Will you accept this view of the so-called confidentiality interest executive privilege, which you have been invoking today, on behalf of the president's ability to prevent Congress from collecting testimony from private citizens? Will you accept that in your service if you are elected to the Senate?
You know, Congressman, I appreciate your confidence in my ability to win in New Hampshire, and I'm sure many people in New Hampshire have that same confidence in me.
Well, that being said, going on your representation to the answer.
Well, I appreciate that, thank you. But that being said, it's not my privilege to waive, Congressman. It's the executive office's privilege, and I'm not an attorney, and so I can't
I am one. So let me ask you a question. Are you representing that the White House has told you that they are invoking the executive privilege on your behalf today?
I don't believe it's an executive privilege, sir, and again, I think we've submitted the letter for your clarification of what the White House has said.
Well, let me ask you.
It's not my privilege to waive.
Well, I don't think it's anyone's privilege to waive because I don't think it exists, Mr. Lewandowski. I think the whole thing is imaginary. It's like the tooth fairy. You didn't work for the president in the White House.
Thank you, Congressman.
I'm sorry?
My children were watching, so thank you for that.
Well, I hope the president's not on then. Mr. Lewandowski, you didn't work for President Trump, did you? You never worked in the White House.
I never worked in the White House, sir.
Okay, so you were a private citizen when you met with the president in the circumstances we're discussing today?
Yes, I am.
Okay, the White House says you shouldn't have to answer any questions today because the president's communications seeking advice or information in connection with the discharge of his duties are highly confidential. And this pushes White House obstructionism to a surreal new extreme. Let's make this clear, because I see no evidence at all that the president was seeking your advice or that you were helping him discharge his official duties. First of all, I just want to make sure we have this on the record. When you went to the White House in June and July of 2017 to meet with the president, you were not a White House employee, were you?
I was not a White House employee.
You've never been a White House employee.
That's correct.
And there were no other White House employees present for that meeting, no secretary, no staff assistant, no other executive branch employee, is that right?
I believe that's accurate.
Okay. And while you claim that you were advising him during those meetings, the president didn't seem to be seeking your advice at all. In fact, you never testified to the special counsel that President Trump once asked for your advice. Here's what you told the special counsel about your meeting on page 91, volume 2, and please put it up on the slide if you would. During the June 19 meeting, Lewandowski recalled that after some small talk, the president brought up Sessions and criticized his recusal from the Russia investigation. The president told Lewandowski that Sessions was weak and that if the president had known about the likelihood of recusal in advance, he would not have appointed Sessions. The president then asked Lewandowski to deliver a message to Sessions and said, write this down. So I'm assuming you told the truth and the whole truth about your discussion when you testified to the special counsel. There's nothing in there about him asking your advice on anything, is there?
There's nothing in the report that says that.
And you were not helping him perform his official duties in office, were you?
I can't discuss my private conversation.
Well, I'm just going based on what's up on the screen. Did you help him implement any of his duties of office at that point?
Again, I can't discuss the substance of the discussion outside what's in the report.
Well, no one has told us what duty you were performing, if you were performing one, or what public policy you were advising on. All of America is reading the same text. We don't see him asking you for your advice about anything. Did he ask your advice about anything? Did he ask your advice about national security, for example, which is the only context I know about an executive privilege, but now it seems as if that's not even being waved around. Look, One can only regard with amazement the logic of this argument. The president tweets out that various Fox News anchors advise him. Are they covered by this privilege too?
The gentleman's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
That'd be a question that you should direct to the White House, yes, sir.
The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Virginia? Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Lewandowski for being here today after testifying 3 other times willingly for you to be here, again, voluntarily. I doubt the others had as much political theater as this one has had, but I appreciate you being here today. This hearing is yet another grand display of political theater that we have seen from this committee over the last several months. The majority should be focused on sound congressional oversight, in particular the IG report about abuse in the FBI, and we should be having a hearing here soon with the Inspector General in front of us to question, but all we've seen for months is desperate attempts to keep this impeach at all costs narrative alive. I don't know what they're calling it today. Is it an inquiry? Is it an investigation? Is it a proceeding? Whatever word that Google thesaurus throws back at them when they type it in, that's what we're at. It's embarrassing as a member of the Judiciary Committee to have you here to have to go through this, but the majority is propping up this Mueller report like a bad remake of Weekend at Bernie's. And it's impeachment based on the Mueller report is dead, and everybody seems to know it except the chairman and several members of the party conference, the majority. We should be hearing from the IG report about the FBI abuse. We are now hearing about the president's mood when he's talking to you in the Oval Office. There was collusion with Russia, but not by President Trump. I want to go back to questions by the gentleman from Florida, not the gentleman from Florida who's still standing by the belief, proven false by Volume 1 of the Mueller report, that President Trump is a Russian agent, but the gentleman from Florida, or gentleman from California who is asking you about the Steele dossier. You've heard of the Steele dossier, correct?
Yes, sir.
It was an opposition research document created by a man named Christopher Steele and paid for by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. Have you ever met Christopher Steele?
I have not.
But you're familiar with who he is?
I am.
Christopher Steele was hired by a firm called Fusion GPS to produce the Steele dossier. Have you heard of Fusion GPS?
Yes, I have.
Well, that's one more than we had from Mr. Mueller during his testimony because he didn't know what Fusion GPS was. Do you know who hired Fusion GPS to produce the Steele dossier?
I believe it was a law firm, Perkins Coie.
And do you know who Christopher Steele's sources were for the information he put in the dossier?
I don't have, I couldn't speak to it directly, sir.
But they were Russian sources, correct?
That's the public reports, yes.
And the FBI and intelligence leaders did not verify the truthfulness of the allegations in the Steele dossier about Donald Trump, did they?
That's my understanding, sir.
And even though the information was never verified, and most of it has been proven to be false, the intelligence community relied on it to get a FISA application to spy on the Trump campaign, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And all of this was laid bare in or should have been laid bare, but Volume 1 clearly indicated that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. That Mueller report that we are still propping up and hashing over week after week after week, you wrote an op-ed about back on March 29th when you clarified that you thought the report was comprehensive. You clarified that it found no wrongdoing by the president or his advisors, but that it is being used, it was being used back in March, and it is still being used by conspiracy-minded Democrats and a hostile media for their own political purposes, thwarting the president's reelection and pursuing further investigations. Do you stand by that op-ed, and do you still believe that it is being misused in that way today?
I do believe it, sir.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to the questions that have been answered or asked?
No, sir.
All right. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Washington.
Thank you. Mr. Lewandowski, what we're seeing here is a pattern of the president doing anything and everything to hide his misconduct from Congress and from the American people. The president tried to get you to deliver a secret message to the Attorney General, all in an attempt to prevent the special counsel from exposing the president's own misconduct. And as soon as the special counsel published his report, and the president's misconduct was exposed, the president tried to cover that up too. Isn't it true that the president has repeatedly tried to discredit your and other witnesses' testimony to the special counsel in the published report?
Not to my knowledge.
You follow the president on Twitter, Mr. Lewandowski?
That's a good question.
Okay.
I'd have to check, but I think it's possible. I may be the only one who doesn't, but I'll fix that immediately. I'm sorry.
Excellent. You've probably seen his tweets, I imagine. Didn't the president say, and I'll put up the slide for you, statements are made about me by certain people in the crazy Mueller report, in itself written by 18 angry Democrat Trump haters, which are fabricated and totally untrue. That is a Trump tweet from April 19th, 2019. That's the president saying that all the statements given by witnesses in the investigation, all those statements are untrue. Mr. Lewandowski, you were a witness in the investigation. You sat for interviews with the special counsel as part of the federal investigation. Isn't that correct?
I did sit, yes.
And the special counsel's report includes statements that you made to the special counsel during the federal investigation. Did you lie at any point to the special counsel during those interviews?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
So your statements to the special counsel in the Mueller report, those are not, quote, fabricated and totally untrue. You didn't lie to the special counsel, did you, Mr. Lewandowski?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
So the president is wrong that the report is fabricated and totally untrue. That's just the president trying to discredit all of the witnesses who said that he obstructed justice. Isn't that correct, Mr. Lewandowski?
That's a question for the president.
Well, which is it? I mean, did you lie, Mr. Lewandowski, or is the president wrong when he says that all of the statements in the report are fabricated?
I think I believe it says certain people. Statements made about me by certain people. It doesn't say all, unless I'm misreading it.
Mr. Lewandowski, did you lie to the president, and is the president correct that everything in the report is fabricated?
I won't comment on private conversations, but I don't appreciate the insinuation that I lied about anything. And I've answered it multiple times. I've answered your question multiple times about my truthfulness to the committee and the special counsel's office.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Lewandowski. But
I have not, to the best of my knowledge, lied to the special counsel.
Mr. Lewandowski, this is my time. You are not yet in the Senate. You are a witness before the Judiciary Committee. Please act like it. This is my time. I control it. The president also said, and please put up this slide, watch out for the people that take so-called notes when the notes never existed until needed. Referring to the Mueller report, referencing people taking notes of meetings with the president, notes that documented the president's obstruction. Mr. Lewandowski, you had notes from your meeting with the president. You've testified to that before us, correct?
Yes.
You were dictated those notes by the president, correct?
I believe that's in the report.
And you told the special counsel, the president's dictated a message to you, and you said, write this down. This is volume 290, page 91. And you gave those notes to the special counsel, correct?
I can't speak to the way the special counsel has conducted their investigation or what information they have.
Did you give the notes to the special counsel? This is not about how the special counsel conducted its investigation.
That's a
it's
question
about whether you gave the notes to the special counsel.
That's a question for Special Counsel Mueller.
Those were your notes, Mr. Lewandowski. They were in your safe. They were dictated to you and written down by you. Did you give them to the special counsel?
I comply with all legal and lawful requests of the special counsel.
Obviously, you are once again obstructing our investigation by refusing to answer questions that...
I've just answered your question. I said comply with all requests by the special counsel.
So you gave the notes to the special counsel?
I've asked and answered your question.
Did you make up that the president told you to write down that note, Mr. Lewandowski?
I can't speak to private conversation I might not have had with the President of the United States.
Did you lie about the president telling you to write down the note? That's not a private conversation.
I believe what is in the report is an accurate description.
Okay, so to be clear, you also gave the special counsel notes from your meeting with the president that are not fabricated and totally untrue as per the president's tweet. So when the president said all those notes never existed until needed, that was his quote, that's just another instance of the president trying to discredit anyone who actually tried to document his misconduct. Now the president is going further, isn't he? You've said previously that you have nothing to hide and that you would answer all questions. Here's what you said. Can I play that clip?
I never asked for presidential immunity whatsoever. Chris, I sat there for 12 hours, and before I left, after the last 4 hours, I said, I will sit here for another 4 hours to answer every single one of your questions to the House Intelligence Committee. I said, before we leave today, I want to be very clear. I will sit and answer every one of your questions. There's no reason to subpoena me because I'm willing to volunteer. If they want to ask me questions, I'll be happy to answer their questions because I have nothing to hide.
It's interesting, Mr. Lewandowski, because obviously the president does have something to hide, because the White House is directing you not to answer the questions in front of the Judiciary Committee. And that is a tremendously shameful thing, Mr. Lewandowski. The American people deserve to know the truth, and I think they deserve to have you answer our questions.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The American people know the truth if they've read the Mueller report and have come to their own conclusions. You and the Trump campaign fully cooperated with the Mueller investigation. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And multiple times that you've been asked to testify voluntarily before numerous different congressional committees, you've complied in that request, even voluntarily, not even needing to be subpoenaed.
That's right, to the best of my recollection, yes.
And after 22 months, 18 lawyers, 500 subpoenas, 500 search warrants, the Mueller report concluded that there was no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. Is that correct?
I haven't read the report, but I believe that's the final conclusion.
So now that we've established that the Mueller report itself doesn't find that there's any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, this whole contention about the president firing or not firing or directing people to fire, is it your understanding, and you may not be able to answer this because it's outside the scope, but is it your understanding in Article 2 of the Constitution that the president could fire the Attorney General without cause for any reason whatsoever?
Let me preface it by saying I'm not an attorney, but it's my understanding that the president has broad authority over members who serve in the executive branch and has broad latitude to hire and fire at his discretion. And
also under that constitutional authority obligated to him under Article 2, he could fire the FBI director without reason, for any reason whatsoever at any time.
Again, I'm not an attorney, but that could be a very realistic interpretation of the Article 2 powers that are provided to the President of the Constitution, yes.
And he could have also had Mr. Mueller fired during the course of the investigation if he wanted to under his powers under Article 2.
Again, I think that'd be a question for the Attorney General or White House counsel, but I believe that would be his prerogative if he so chose, yes.
So given all that, he did not choose to exercise any of that authority. In fact, he allowed for the campaign and members like yourselves to coordinate with them, cooperate with them, and until now that we've gone through a 22-month investigation where the American people have been sold a lie of Russian collusion, now we're going to just try to rehash this narrative amongst the American people, despite the fact that it has been investigated by investigators, lawyers, FBI agents for 22 months. I would be happy to yield to any other members in my caucus that would like to yield. If not, I'll yield back to the chair. Thank you for your time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, just for the record, I do love this country. I spent 27 years enforcing the law, and now I have the honor of writing the law. When special counsel visited us, and in his testimony, he talked about a spectrum of witnesses who were either telling half-truths up to those who were outright liars. Today, I do have to wonder how many untruths, how many members of Congress neglecting their duties and their oath, and how many White House attorneys does it take to protect one innocent president? Mr. Lewandowski, you started off your testimony, or during your opening statement, you talked about being a certified police officer in New Hampshire. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you believe that police officers have a very tough job?
I do.
But even with all of the stuff that law enforcement officers have to put up with, not only enforcing the law and patrolling their communities, but just working horrible hours, I'm sure you know about that. With all of that stuff, do you believe that law enforcement officers, when they engage in wrongdoing, that they should be held accountable?
I do.
Mr. Lewandowski, you said that if anyone were trying to coordinate with Russia, they should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Is that correct?
I believe, Congresswoman, I said if anybody attempted to impact the outcome of the election illegally, they should spend the rest of their lives in jail.
So do you believe that a person coordinating with Russia should not be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law?
I think anybody who's attempting to impact the outcome of an election illegally, whether it's with Russia or any other foreign entity, should spend the rest of their life in jail.
Mr. Lewandowski, I know you know, and I believe, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you care about the special counsel's report concluding that Russia government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a sweeping and systematic fashion. Do you agree with that conclusion?
I believe Russia attempted to influence the election, yes.
In fact, the report documents over 100 contacts between Russian nationals or those acting on their behalf and the Trump campaign or those advising then-candidate Trump. The report focused that those contacts with Russia included offers of assistance to the campaign, invitations for candidate Trump and Putin to meet in person. Mr. Lewandowski, you said you knew nothing about this. Is that correct?
I don't believe I had any conversation with any Russian or Russian contact.
You knew nothing about them offering assistance to the campaign at all?
No, I don't believe I have.
You said that
I
never spoke to a Russian, I never contacted a Russian, I never coordinated with the Russian, I don't know anything about Russia, okay? I never spoke to them, and I was the campaign manager. Do you remember saying something similar to that?
I think that's an accurate statement.
You also said, and I quote, you had sole control over the campaign other than the candidate himself. I sat next to the candidate Trump for thousands of hours during the period of time. Would that be a pretty close to what you remember saying?
It would depend on the time frame of the campaign we're speaking about.
When you served as campaign manager
Right.
of the Trump campaign?
There were multiple periods of time from...
Would you say that you had sole control over the campaign other than the candidate himself? Would that be
Not on the day I was fired, I didn't have sole control.
prior to that day?
Again, not leading up to...
There is nothing funny.
Not leading up to that day, Congresswoman.
There is absolutely...
You asked me a question, I'm happy to give you an answer. If you don't like my answer, I could rephrase it.
Excuse me?
I said if you don't like my answer, I could rephrase it. But no, I don't think I had sole control of the campaign the day preceding my firing or the day I was fired or multiple days leading up to that. So if you have a specific time frame...
Let's forget the firing. The first month that you were the campaign manager, would you say that you had sole control over the campaign other than the candidate himself?
Are you talking about in June of 2015?
So you talked to then candidate Trump pretty much on a regular basis, right? You've established that you talk to him on a regular basis. Is that correct?
Yes.
And out of being the campaign manager, being very close to the candidate, the campaign has over 100 contacts with Russia, and you didn't know anything about that?
That's correct.
Did you ever
ask? To the best of my knowledge.
Did you ever ask the president if he knew about his campaign's contacts with Russia after the reports came out that there were over 100 contacts? Did you ever ask him after that report, those reports came out?
I'm sorry, did I ask who, Congresswoman? I missed that.
Did you ask Trump if he had ever had, did he know that the campaign had regular contact with Russians after the report came out? After you heard that report, those reports, did you ever
time
ask
has expired, but the witness may answer.
Congresswoman, I couldn't disclose a private conversation I may or may not have had with the president.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, the gentleman from Texas. California.
I'm from Nevada.
No.
Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Mr. Lewandowski, I'm glad to hear that both of us share a deep love for this country and that both of us have a tremendous distaste for any foreign agents that may want to interfere with our democracy in this country. I'm going to ask you if you're familiar with George Papadopoulos.
I am.
And you agree that he was a foreign policy advisor for the Trump administration as of April 27, 2016?
To the campaign, Congressman.
To the campaign, correct?
To the campaign.
Yes. As you know, George pled guilty to felony crimes, including lying to federal investigators. We've got his indictment up on the screen. And one of those things he pled guilty to was lying about how often he was communicating with Russia, when he was an advisor to the campaign. Correct?
I don't know if that's what he pled guilty to, Your Honor, sir.
Okay. It's in this slide. In fact, I'm quoting the Mueller report now. Throughout April 2016, Papadopoulos continued to correspond and meet with Russians and seek Russian contacts. And of course, that's up on volume 1, page 87, the slide. The report also documents Papadopoulos trying to schedule then candidate Trump to travel to Russia to meet with Putin. Is that correct?
I don't know what's in the report, sir.
Okay. The report also documents emails discussing this potential Russian trip, and I'll show them to you in case you've not read them, correct? You can put those up, please. On April 27th, the Trump campaign foreign policy advisor, Papadopoulos, again sent you, sir, an email telling you that he had, quote, been receiving a lot of calls over the last months about Putin wanting to host Trump and the team when the time was right. Do you know about that?
If that's what's in the report.
Volume 1, page 89.
Okay, it's the first I've seen it.
Okay. On June 1st, Papadopoulos forwarded you another email from a Russian official raising the possibility of meeting in Moscow, asking you if that was something that you wanted to move forward with. Is that accurate or not?
I don't know.
Volume 1, page 89. Slide, please.
I see the report, sir.
Okay. So I would say that this was not about you receiving information about coordinating potential meetings with Russia, but actually you responded to Papadopoulos, telling him to connect with Sam Clovis because he was going to be the running point man. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that to be accurate.
Okay. Did you tell Papadopoulos to stop communication with Russians?
I don't believe I did.
Okay. You actually encouraged that communication, correct, by referring him to a running point man, which is Mr. Clovis. Yes?
No, Congressman. What I was attempting to do with contact from Mr. Papadopoulos, who I had very limited interaction with, was to put him in touch with a staff person who could have a more articulate and thorough conversation. It wasn't, while I ran the day-to-day responsibility of the campaign, 1,000 emails a day didn't allow me the privilege of responding in detail to each of them.
Candidate Trump has said that you and he were communicating 10 to 12 to 14 hours a day. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if that's what the president said, sir.
He did. Did you at all mention to candidate Trump these communications that Russians were having with the campaign?
Not to the best of my recollection.
Did you communicate with the family about these communications that were going on?
Not to the best of my recollection.
You and I both have a distaste for foreign agents affecting our democratic process. Did you report these incidences to the FBI?
I did not.
Did you bring it up to anybody's attention?
I think just Mr. Clovis, because I did not see that outreach to me as an offer to interfere with the outcome of the election.
What did you see it as?
I saw it outreach from a potential foreign agent to a policy advisor, and that's why I asked him to get in touch with Mr. Clovis.
I mean, for the safety, just to be on the safe side, wouldn't you call the FBI and say, hey, these guys are calling us, please check it out?
You know, I think in hindsight, that's something that Mr. Clovis probably should have done.
So you got Russians hacking our elections, your campaign advisors talking to another campaign advisor about Russians interested in communicating with the campaign.
Congressman, I don't believe I ever had a communication of any Russians trying to offer to interfere in the outcome of the election.
But you did have knowledge, sir, of people in your campaign communicating with Russians.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of the things that has always sort of caught my attention was the fact that campaign chairman Paul Manafort shared with the Russian operative, Mr. Kolemnik, the campaign's, and this is a quote from the report, strategy for winning Democratic votes in Midwestern states. That's in volume 1, pages 6 and 7. And that he shared with the Russian operative internal polling data on the campaign. Now, did you have any knowledge that Mr. Manafort was sharing internal polling data or the campaign's Midwest strategy with these Russian operatives? Did you know about that?
I did not.
So although it's been reported that you continued to advise the campaign even after you left and had an enduring presence, that was not something you were aware of?
Correct. I was not aware.
Well, I'm just interested, you know, all of us here, both Republicans and Democrats, have something in common. We've run for office, and we know a little bit how to do that. And one of the things that I think we all know is that internal polling data is generally something that you don't share broadly. You use it to base your campaign. Would you say that's correct, as a general rule?
I think it's a good general rule. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm mystified why the manager of the Trump campaign would choose the one thing that would allow the Russians, who were, we already know from other evidence, trying to influence this campaign, information that would allow them to guide their efforts, this internal polling data. Do you have any insight into that, why that would happen?
I don't know why Mr. Manafort would share that information.
It seems to me that, do you know whether the Russians asked for it?
I don't know.
Don't know. It seems to me that of all the things in the report, and there are many troubling things, that the Russians, and it's clear that they were trying to elect Donald Trump president. Actually, Putin has said that publicly since then. They received from the Trump campaign manager the internal polling data and the strategy to win in the Midwest with Democratic votes, not once, but repeatedly. At the same time, there were over 100 contacts between Russians and the campaign. Can't you understand that would raise some anxiety, those facts?
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Manafort was never the campaign manager.
Are you saying he was not involved in the campaign?
No, I'm saying he was not the campaign manager, just as a point of clarification.
Chairman, manager, a person in charge of the campaign for a period of time. I just think that when you add it up, who would know about this other than Mr. Manafort? Can you tell us who else we need to call who would have the facts of this information?
Well, we know where Mr. Manafort is, and he's currently available for questioning, I think, if you're looking for him.
In addition to him, who...
Mr. Gates, potentially?
Mr. Gates might know about who initiated, whether the Russians were asking for the polling data or whether it was the idea of the Trump campaign itself to provide the polling data. That would be Mr. Gates would know that, in addition to Mr. Manafort.
Yes.
Do you think that the president was advised of the day-to-day details of his campaign?
I don't think the president was advised of the minutia of the day-to-day details of the campaign, as probably most candidates are not advised of the day-to-day minutia. What
level of information was the president generally provided? Would it be, we've got a strategy to win the Midwest, or we're just hoping for the best? What would be the level of information generally that the president as a candidate would receive?
I can only speak to my tenure there and my conversation with the candidate at the time about the information I would have shared. I would have basically shared his travel calendar for the next day or week so he'd understand where we were traveling to. I would share with him media opportunities if he wanted to be on or have the opportunity to be on a specific television show, and then messaging points of what we may want to be discussing during that tenure or time of the campaign, particularly if we're going to be in a primary.
And I would assume, like all other campaigns, that the messaging was informed by the polling data that you had.
Well, just as a point of clarification, Congresswoman, we didn't do any polling data for the first approximately 15 months of the campaign.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Mr. Lewandowski, one of the major concerns raised by the special counsel's report is that the president has had a pattern of witness tampering conduct. So let's look at some facts. We know that Attorney General Sessions was a witness in the special counsel's investigation because of his role on Trump's campaign, right?
If that's in the report, I don't know that to be accurate.
Well, that's why Sessions recused himself. So you've confirmed today that the president dictated a message for you to give to Attorney General Sessions about what he should say about Russian contacts with the Trump campaign, correct?
In general, that's accurate, yes.
So you told the special counsel that the president scripted what he wants Sessions to say in a public speech as if it were Sessions' own words about his knowledge of the Russian contacts with the campaign, right?
That seems to be an accurate representation.
Okay. Now, that isn't the only time that the president tried to influence witness testimony, according to the special counsel's report. White House counsel Don McGahn told the special counsel, and I think we have a slide on this, and I see you've found your copy of the Mueller report, so if you want to follow along, it's volume 2, page 123. The president discussed with aides whether and in what way former campaign chairman or manager, whatever he is, Manafort, might be cooperating with the special counsel's investigation and whether Manafort knew any information that could be harmful to the president. The special counsel concluded that, and we have another quote, and again, if you want to follow along, it's volume 2, page 132, evidence concerning the president's conduct toward Manafort indicates that the president intended to encourage Manafort to not cooperate with the government. Did the president ever try to discourage you from cooperating with the special counsel, Mr. Lewandowski?
I can't speak to any private conversation I may or may not have had with the president, other than to say I've always been told to tell the truth.
Okay, so you're not going to tell us today whether or not he encouraged you not to cooperate with the special counsel?
I've never been instructed to do anything but tell the truth.
Now, Congressman Ratcliffe asked what you knew about the president dangling pardons to some of his employees, and you mentioned Manafort, you mentioned Gates, there's also Flynn and Cohen. And the president and his counsel have suggested that pardons might be forthcoming for those folks. One of the reasons you're here today is that the Mueller report identified you as a participant in the president's attempts to limit or shut down the Department of Justice's investigation of Russia's sweeping interference in our 2016 election. Has the president ever offered you a pardon?
Again, the White House has directed not to disclose the substance of any discussions with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch confidentiality.
Okay, we've seen the letters, so you're not going to answer whether or not the president has offered you a pardon.
Ma'am, it's not my privilege, and I'm respecting the White House's direction.
My time. Thank you. On the same day that you were subpoenaed to appear before this committee, August 15th, the president did indicate that he's going to support your Senate campaign, didn't he?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I just want to know for the record that when Mr. Lewandowski asked for the committee to give him a little break about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago, he took the time during that recess to launch his Senate campaign website with a tweet. And I think that fact says an awful lot about the witness's motivation to appear here today, and I've heard enough. I yield back.
The gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I, too, want to clarify for the record that I think earlier you said that Democrats in this committee, perhaps the Democrats, hate this president more than they love their country. That simply is not true. You're looking at someone that loves her country, and more importantly, as a judge, I've taken an oath of office more than once to uphold the constitutional laws of this country. And I take this work of this committee very seriously, and I would hope that you, as a former peace officer, would do the same. And show more respect to this committee and the work that we're undertaking. Having said that, Mr. Lewandowski, you agree that if anyone does try to meddle with U.S. elections, they should go to jail, right?
I do.
I know there's a clip of you saying that. If we can run the clip.
Now, if other people who were operating outside the realm of what their responsibilities were trying to coordinate to materially impact the outcome of an election, and if they did that, I hope they go to jail for the rest of their lives, because our democracy is too important to play with.
Well, I agree with that statement, and I know that on July 27, 2016, when you were still regularly communicating with Trump candidate, Trump publicly called for Russia to find missing Clinton emails by stating on July 27.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
So, Mr. Lewandowski, let's be very clear. In that speech, the president was suggesting publicly to the whole world that Russia should hack Hillary Clinton's emails. And it got even worse. After his statement, Russia did hack his opponent's emails as he asked them to. And when WikiLeaks released those emails, Mr. Trump tweeted how great it was. He said at his campaign appearances in October and November of 2016, "This just came out, WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks." He said that in Pennsylvania in 2016, October. "This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove." He said that in Minnesota in October of 2016. He had said in Ohio, "Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks." And I believe all those quotes were also there for you to see. So again, let's be clear. This is then candidate Trump tweeting congratulations to Russia and WikiLeaks for stealing documents from U.S. citizens. And I think, if it could get worse, it did. Multiple individuals have testified under oath that Mr. Trump, in fact, knew about the release of these stolen emails prior to the release. I'm going to read you these quotes. Witnesses testified under oath that, quote, Trump privately sought information about future week releases. That's in the Mueller report, volume 2, page 77. The slide's up there for you to see. Deputy Campaign Manager Rick Gates told the special counsel that he, quote, was with Trump on a trip to an airport, and you can't read too much of it because it's redacted, but it said, and shortly after the call ended, Trump told Gates that more releases of damaging information would be coming. He knew it. He said it'll be coming, which turned out to be true. That's in volume 2 of page 18. So if the screen is up, the shot is up there. So in fact, the White House redacted some of the information in the report, and you saw those redactions on the screen. So there could actually be more in those redactions. The president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, testified to Congress this past February under oath that, quote, Mr. Trump knew from Roger Stone in advance about the WikiLeaks. And you've got the slide there showing us exactly what the testimony reflects. Roger Stone has been charged with serious federal crimes for his conduct during the campaign. In his indictment, it also says that, quote, Stone was contacted by senior Trump campaign officials to inquire about future releases by WikiLeaks. Stone thereafter told Trump campaign about potential future releases, and that's in the indictment, and I have a copy here if you wish to see it. So again, to be clear, Roger Stone has known the president for years. They've been longtime friends. Didn't you say, quote, and here's the screenshot from CNN, Roger Stone's history with Donald Trump goes back, he's 20 years. He's been someone who has known then Mr. Trump and worked with him through business dealings long before we ever started a political campaign. So the fact is that he stole materials, he encouraged the hacking, and don't you think that's doing what you said no one should do? And if they do, that they should go to jail for the rest of their lives?
I stand by my statement that anybody who attempted to materially impact the outcome of an election should go to jail for the rest of their lives.
The president should go to jail for doing what I just reiterated outlined in my statement.
I didn't say that, ma'am.
Well, it seems to me that even this president needs to be held accountable because no one is above the law. And I agree with you that if someone does interfere with our elections, they should go to jail, including this president, if necessary.
The gentlelady yields back.
Yield back.
The gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Lewandowski, I'd like to get back to something that an exchange that you had with Mr. Cicilline and Mr. Jeffries. We've talked a great deal today about the message that the president asked you to deliver to then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And as you've testified today, and you've informed the special counsel as well during the special prosecutor's investigation, you, quote, stored the notes in a safe, right? And as you'll see on the slide there, quoting directly from the special counsel's report, which you described to the special counsel as the standard procedure for sensitive items. But that was your standard procedure. That is not normal protocol for official White House documents. My colleague mentioned this earlier, but since you're not a White House employee and have not been, as you've testified, I'll remind you again that the White House has a legal protocol to follow for official documents. As you'll see on this next slide, this screen is a memo from this White House, Donald Trump's White House, about the Presidential Records Act. So the president is well informed about the record requirements for our commander-in-chief. And as you'll see on this slide, under the PRA, the White House must preserve and maintain all memos, letters, notes, emails, and written communications from the president, just like the note that he dictated to you. And of course, those notes are not supposed to be kept in a secret safe in his former campaign manager's house. And so it's clear, I think, to folks who read special counsel's report that that is why the president asked you. He wanted this message to be hidden, and he knew you wouldn't keep a record. In fact, you took it out of the White House after Ms. Hicks typed it up and stored it in your personal safe. Now, I want to give you an opportunity to just confirm this. In your exchange with Mr. Swalwell, you talked a bit about the notes that you dictated from the president, and in the special counsel's report, it makes clear on page 91, the last sentence of the second paragraph, that when you met with the president, this was, quote, the first time the president had asked Lewandowski to take dictation. And Lewandowski wrote as fast as possible to make sure he captured the content correctly. That sentence cites your interview with the special counsel. In your exchange with Mr. Swalwell, you contradicted that. And so I'm trying to figure out that discrepancy. Was this, in fact, the first time that you had been asked by the president to take dictation?
To be clear, the words that are written in this report are not my words. That's the representation of a summary of my conversation with the special counsel. And I can say that I have on numerous occasions been directed by the president to write specific information down and deliver that.
So, to that end, Mr. Lewandowski, have you turned over those notes? Were those notes turned over to the special prosecutor?
I've complied with all requirements of the special counsel.
I appreciate you saying that. I'll ask the question again. Did you turn over any other notes that had been dictated to you by the president to the special prosecutor outside of this note that's referenced in the report?
I've complied with all requirements of the special counsel.
So the record will reflect that you won't answer that particular question. And I think that's an important one for this committee to get to the bottom to. Because ultimately, what you are saying is that the special counsel's statement in this report is incorrect. And if that is the case, this committee has an obligation to ascertain the contents of those other notes that you've described. I just want to go back to the message that was delivered to you by the president to tell the Attorney General that if he did not meet with you, you should tell him that he was fired. That's on volume 2, page 93. You're aware, I believe there's a slide that will pop up here. You can see it in front of you. I know that you're aware that the Attorney General is a cabinet level position, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And he is, in fact, the head of the Department of Justice. He's the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You knew that you couldn't fire the Attorney General, correct?
Yeah, I can't fire anybody.
Yeah, and as you told Mr. Priebus, as the next slide attests, you told the chief of staff at that time, what can I do? I'm not an employee of the administration. I'm a nobody. So if that's the case, it again is pretty clear to anyone who reads the special counsel's report that the reason the president was delivering this message to you was so that you could scare the Attorney General into complying with the directive that he had given you. He enlisted you to dictate a secret message, which you store in your personal safe at home, for the Attorney General, and then he tells you to tell the chief law enforcement officer of the United States that if he won't meet with you, a private citizen, that he would be fired. At the end of the day, we know it's because the president didn't want anyone investigating him. The special counsel's report certainly supports that. And I will leave the last slide as I see my time has expired. But the special counsel's words speak for themselves with respect to his conclusion in this exchange. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, I want to just pause here for just a moment. We just heard facts about a foreign government attacking our elections. We've heard that quite a bit this afternoon. And we know that's a serious crime. You even said so, and I definitely agree with you. In fact, the special counsel's investigation resulted in criminal indictments of more than a dozen defendants. That included guilty pleas and indictments of top Trump campaign officials. And these guilty pleas include multiple charges of conspiracy against the United States and lying and misrepresenting statements to the Department of Justice officials. But it also included indictments of criminal charges against 13 individual Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities, primarily for conspiracy to defraud the United States. Is that correct, Mr. Lewandowski?
I believe that's what that says, yes.
Thank you. You agree, and you've actually said so today, that anyone, whether it's a Trump campaign official or Russian individuals and entities, anyone who attacks our elections should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law, correct?
I do agree with that.
Thank you. I agree, too. So, to be very clear, the special counsel uncovered serious crimes by over a dozen individuals, including Russian nationals, for conspiracy against the United States. I'm a representative of Georgia, and I'm very concerned with protecting our elections. Georgia has actually actively been targeted for election interference by the Russians. Unsealed indictments from the Mueller investigation showed that Russian operatives visited websites for Cobb and Fulton counties. Both of those reside within my own district, looking for vulnerabilities that they might be able to exploit. And you have said, not once, but several times, and I quote, trying to coordinate to materially impact the outcome of the election, that if they did that, I hope they go to jail for the rest of their lives because our democracy is too important to play with. Mr. Lewandowski, those are your words. You've continued to stand by that, and as I've said today earlier, I agree. Our democracy is simply too important to play with, so I'm glad that we're investigating, and I'm glad that we are holding accountable anyone who will attack our elections. And that's why Special Counsel Mueller's investigation was so vitally important. It exposed people attacking our elections in Georgia and throughout the country. And that is an issue that should never divide us among partisan lines. So we have to make sure that we are protecting our 2020 elections at all costs. Every American deserves the right to vote, and we must protect that right at all costs, because democracy is, as you have said today, too important to play with. And I will yield the balance of my time to Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. I want to thank Mr. Lewandowski for being here today and answering these questions for many hours. With respect to Mr. Michael Cohen, he communicated regularly with Mr. Trump during the campaign. Is that correct?
There was regular communication, yes.
And I want to read from paragraph 7B of Mr. Cohen's federal indictment, which states, Cohen asked Individual 1 about the possibility of Individual 1 traveling to Russia in connection with the Moscow project, and ask a senior campaign official about potential business travel to Russia. The senior campaign official Mr. Cohen references is yourself. Is that correct?
Could be.
Mr. Cohen testified before the House Oversight Committee on February 27th. It's on the screen in front of you. He testified specifically that that senior advisor was yourself. I'll skip to the end. Congressman DeSagne asked, who was the campaign official? And Mr. Cohen responded, quote, Corey Lewandowski. Now, more importantly, Mr. Cohen said to the special counsel that he discussed with candidate Trump the subject of traveling to Russia during the campaign, and that Trump, quote, indicated a willingness to travel to Russia, unquote. That's volume 1, page 78. Mr. Cohen then testified before Congress that Trump was individual 1. It's on the screen in front of you. Is that correct?
That's what Mr. Cohen testified to.
Looking at the indictment again, we can now fill in the blanks. Mr. Cohen asked individual 1, candidate Trump, and a senior campaign official, you, about traveling to Russia. Mr. Chair, may I take my regular 5 minutes at this time? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. During your time as campaign manager, you communicated regularly with the president. Is that correct?
With then candidate Trump, yes, sir.
In fact, you said you sat next to him for, quote, thousands of hours while you were campaign chairman. During your time as campaign manager, did you ever have a conversation with candidate Trump about his campaign team having contact with Russians?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
The special counsel's report includes emails from George Papadopoulos. He sent to you asking about Mr. Trump traveling to Russia. Mr. Cohen also asked you about traveling to Russia per his indictment. Carter Page emailed you about Trump speaking at an event in Russia. And in your thousands of hours speaking with the president, you never mentioned any of these people emailing you, asking you about Trump traveling to Russia. Is that your testimony here today?
I don't recall ever having a conversation with Mr. Trump about traveling to Russia.
What about after the time that Trump was elected? Did you ever discuss with the president his knowledge of his campaign's interactions with Russians?
Again, at the advice of White House counsel, I can't answer questions that would be privileged, and I respect that privilege.
Mr. Lewandowski, of course, was never a White House employee. I know it's been asked before, but I'm going to ask again, Mr. Chairman. I have a parliamentary inquiry. Is this an appropriate assertion?
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Is this an appropriate assertion of privilege?
This is most certainly not an appropriate assertion of privilege for the reasons I stated before. Certainly, there's no conceivable privilege for any time period before the president was the president.
To be clear, the White House apparently is directing you not to answer whether the president knew about his campaign communicating with Russia just after Russia had attacked our elections. I think the American people want to know and are frustrated today. What, in fact, are you hiding? In Mr. Cohen's federal indictment, it named Mr. Trump as knowing about campaign's communications with Russia. Again, did you ever discuss this fact with Mr. Trump?
Again, to the best of my knowledge, during our campaign, I never had a conversation with Mr. Trump about any contacts with Russia.
The president is named as individual 1 in a criminal case by his former personal attorney. You're asking us to believe that you never discussed with the president this fact in all of your thousands of hours of conversations.
Again, Congressman, to the best of my knowledge, I don't recall ever having a conversation with candidate Trump about any interaction with Russia.
Mr. Cohen's indictment also states that candidate Trump directed Mr. Cohen to make payments to certain individuals beginning in October of 2016 in order to prevent those individuals from telling negative stories about candidate Trump. During the fall of 2016, at the time of these payments, did you ever discuss with candidate Trump these payments?
To the best of my knowledge, I never had a conversation about those payments.
And what about after the time that Mr. Trump was elected? Did you ever have a conversation with him about those payments?
The White House has directed that I not disclose any conversations or the substance of those discussions with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch privilege.
To be clear, you're being told that you're not allowed to answer whether the president told you that he directed his personal lawyer to make illegal payments.
I'm simply going at the direction of the White House. It's not my privilege to waive, Congressman.
To be clear, the White House is telling you not to answer whether you discussed potential crimes with the President of the United States. Mr. Lewandowski, it's clear to me that the President...
Gentleman, yield for a moment.
Please.
I believe the Nixon case established the very ironclad principle that the discussions regarding criminal acts are not privileged. So there's no possibility of a privilege with respect to the question of whether you were asked about criminal activities. I yield.
Mr. Lewandowski, it's clear to me that the president, the campaign, and yourself did not want the American people to know about any campaign contact with Russia. You lied to cover it up. You lied when you publicly said you knew, quote, nothing about Russia. Multiple senior campaign members were regularly communicating with you about traveling to Russia, meeting with Russians, and even Mr. Trump possibly going to Russia. There's documentation that contradicts your denials, including emails with you personally. This committee, our committee, will not let anyone, not the President of the United States, not anyone, to hide the truth of the American people any longer. No one is above the law. I yield back.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman will state his point of order.
Mr. Chairman, the refusal by Mr. Lewandowski to answer the questions about whether he had discussions with the president about payments from personal lawyer to those payments from the personal lawyer, or whether he had discussions with the president about knowledge of the campaign's interactions with Russia, are not protected. And I would ask, as the chairman reconsiders whether to hold Mr. Lewandowski in contempt as he goes forward from this hearing, it's important to note that the White House directed Mr. Lewandowski not to discuss the substance of conversations about official government matters. The White House counsel is here. If the chairman would like to ask them whether they assert that those discussions about Russia or personal payments are official government business, they can be asked. Otherwise, certainly as you consider and you weigh whether to hold Mr. Lewandowski in contempt, you should consider those.
It is certainly the case. I'm not going to ask White House counsel. It is certainly the case that conversations about criminal actions are not official White House business, without question. And I will give Mr. Lewandowski, in light of this ruling, the opportunity to answer that question again.
Mr. Chairman. While he's doing that, we can I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, I'm not an attorney, and I had to continue at the advice of White House counsel, and you're welcome to take this matter up with them. But I've drawn the line of having private conversations with the President of the United States during the transition or his time as presidency. I've been very candid and open about answering all questions about the campaign, and I will continue to do so. But at the direction of the council, they have exerted executive privilege of which is not mine to waive.
I will then simply observe on the record that the White House has claimed privilege with respect to the question of possible criminal activity or instructions for criminal activity by the President of the United States.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
In light of the discussion just now and the gentleman's from Florida's long question, was there ever a doubt in this committee that we were not trying to find a way to hold him in contempt? Was there ever a doubt today from the start of this that we were ever trying not to hold him in contempt?
It's not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Well, I just wanted to see what my time next week.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness has requested a brief recess. Accordingly, the committee will take a 5-minute recess. The committee stands in recess. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, in between your first meeting on June 19th and your second meeting with the President on July 19th, you went on vacation. And also during that time, there was public reporting about the Trump Tower meeting, correct? This is on page 92.
If it's in the report, I believe it to be accurate.
On July 19th, when the President for a second time asked you to deliver the message to Sessions, you said, and I quote, the message would be delivered soon, page 93. Correct?
Page 93.
But you didn't. You didn't call Jeff Sessions. You didn't try to meet with him. So the President asked you twice in the Oval Office to deliver a secret message to the Attorney General of the United States, a message that you quickly wrote down word for word at the President's direction, correct? Sir?
I believe I wrote it down.
Yeah. And when you worked for the President during his campaign, did you ever ignore or disobey directions from candidate Trump?
I didn't believe it to be in order.
Just to be clear, although you were not working for the President in any capacity, you wanted to give the President the impression that you were going to follow his orders, correct?
No.
Well, you said, I'm going to take care of it.
Is that referenced in the report?
Did you tell the President you were going to deliver the message?
I can't comment on private conversations
sir,
with the
it's
President
on
to preserve
page-
executive privilege.
I'm sorry?
I can read you the exact statement again if you'd like me to. I said the White House has directed that I not disclose the substance of any discussions with the President or his advisors to protect executive branch confidentiality.
You're not going to stonewall me in my questioning.
Would you like me to answer your question?
Been spinning. You're here with the President of the United States in the Oval Office. He's directing you to deliver a message to the chief law enforcement officer in the United States, which you understood would effectively end the ongoing investigation into this president and his campaign. So you told the President that the message would be delivered soon. But then, this is on page 93, you immediately following the meeting with the President, you gave Dearborn the message the President had dictated to be delivered to Sessions, correct?
I believe that's what the report says.
And you didn't tell the President that you'd already asked Dearborn to deliver the message. You just said it would be delivered soon. This is on page 92, correct? It's on page 92. You didn't want to tell the President that you were passing off his message to someone else, did you? You knew he wanted you, someone he had described as his enforcer, a loyal soldier, to do it because the President trusted you. Isn't that right?
That's a question for the President, sir.
Then, well, why didn't you then deliver the message to Mr. Dearborn, to Jeff Sessions directly? Why did you give it to Mr. Dearborn to do?
I think I've testified I was out of town.
For 2 weeks.
Yes, I don't live in town, Congressman. Unlike you, sir, I don't live in town.
During your second meeting in the Oval Office, the President told you that if Sessions wouldn't meet with you, to tell him he was fired. Did you, Mr. Lewandowski, ever threaten the Attorney General that if he didn't meet with you, he would be fired?
No.
Did you tell Mr. Dearborn to tell Sessions that he would be fired if he didn't take this meeting as the President directed?
Congressman, the White House has directed not to disclose the substance of any discussion with the President or his advisors to protect executive branch confidentiality.
The reason you didn't tell the President that was because you know that it was wrong. And the President, isn't that correct?
No.
Well, the President wasn't aware that you ignored his directive to tell Jeff Sessions he was fired if he didn't meet with you, was he?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I'll move on. In fact, to prove to the Attorney General that the threat was real, 4 days later, on July 22nd, the President directed Priebus, his chief of staff, to obtain Sessions' resignation. That's on the slide in front of you. The President told Priebus that he had to get Sessions to resign immediately. Did you know that?
No.
This evidence as a whole strongly suggests that the President was reinforcing to Sessions that his job was on the line at the same time as the President believed you were delivering the message to end the investigation into the 2016 campaign. And all of this made everyone very uncomfortable, including Mr. Dearborn, which is at page 93. And he told you that he was uncomfortable being a messenger to Sessions, correct?
No.
Well, were you aware when you asked Rick Dearborn to deliver this message to the Attorney General on behalf of the President of the United States, it created the same legal culpability for you as if you delivered the message yourself? Are you aware of that?
Congressman, the President didn't ask me anything illegal, and he never asked me to keep anything a secret.
Are you aware that when you asked Mr. Dearborn to deliver this message to end the investigation and just focus on future investigations, you thought you were protecting yourself, but you were in fact committing a crime? Rick Dearborn knew delivering the message was wrong. You knew it was wrong. That's why even after being asked to deliver it and saying you'd handle it soon, you passed it off to him and you never followed up. And guess what? I also think it's very, very wrong. In fact, I think the President asking a private citizen to try to scare his Attorney General into ending the investigation into the President's conduct is obstruction of justice, plain and simple. I yield back.
The gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I don't believe there was a question.
Very well. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, thank you for being here today. You've come voluntarily. You've heard slanderous attacks on you. You've had people refer to you as a gutted fish. You've had people refer to you as a chicken. You've had people imply that you're here to lie. That's unfortunate, and it's beneath this committee, quite frankly. We're here, ostensibly, they tell me that they want to hear the truth. You're here to tell the truth today, right, Mr. Lewandowski?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you've given lots of testimony. You've told the truth repeatedly. I see a list of 302s when you were talking to the FBI, right?
Yes, sir.
And those 302s, they didn't record that. Those are after notes, right?
I believe that's right.
You gave testimony to the intelligence committees of both houses, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And so here you sit here today, and you gave testimony to, and you gave interviews, I think roughly 20 hours worth of interviews to the Mueller team, right?
Yes, sir.
And if we look at this Mueller report, we see your name in various places throughout the Mueller report, right? Fair enough?
I've never read the report, but I think that's accurate, sir.
You're not unwise to not have read the report.
Nobody's actually read the report, but that's okay.
Yeah, I've read the report.
You're the one. We've been looking for you.
Yeah, I'm the one. And your name is all over this report. But oddly enough, when you were asked by a member of the other side to look at volume 2, page 86, and they wanted you to testify to it, you might be surprised. Your name's not even mentioned on that page. You know that? You're not even mentioned there. They were asking you questions to comment about things where your name's not even there. Did you know that?
No, sir.
That same person then asked you to talk about page 49 and 50, volume 2. Guess what? Guess whose names don't appear there? Yours. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? Odd, isn't it, that they would be asking you to comment on pages that you weren't even there. So let's talk a little bit more about some of what members of Congress have done. They've spent 2 years claiming without evidence that then candidate Trump and the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. As a member of the campaign, you've responded today. How do you respond? Would you like to expand on that again today?
During my tenure at the campaign, Congressman, as I said in my opening statement, never do I believe I had any interaction with any foreign agents, foreign agencies, or foreign governments who are attempting to impact the outcome of the election. I've said very publicly, if anybody did attempt to impact the outcome of the election in a legal manner, I hope they spend the rest of their lives in jail.
Yeah, and so we know that on January 2019, on the Chris Matthews show, a member of this committee was asked, do you believe the president right now has been an agent of the Russians?
That was me.
That member said, yes. Chris Matthews followed up and said, an agent like in the 1940s working for a foreign power? That individual responded, he's working on behalf of the Russians, yes.
Still believe that.
And, you know, Mr. Chairman,
The gentleman from
Arizona's got the time.
From Arizona has the time.
I'd like 10 seconds added back on.
He's got 10 seconds in any event.
So as a close friend, personal, and advisor of the president, member of the Trump campaign, how do you respond to that accusation by a member of this committee made months and months ago, even before the Mueller report came out and said there was no collusion or coordination?
You know, Congressman, I find it beneath the dignity of the President of the United States to accuse somebody of that. And while I didn't support President Obama when he was the president, didn't vote for him, I still wanted my country to be successful, so I wanted him to be successful. And I think those faceless, baseless accusations against our president are unfounded and unwarranted.
So I want to just cover the last little bit of this. We hear today lots of questions about a meeting you had with the president regarding Jeff Sessions and some note that was dictated to you. That was after Special Counsel Mueller was appointed, wasn't it?
I believe it was, yes.
Did the president ask you to stop Mr. Mueller or to encourage Mr. Sessions to stop the Mueller investigation at any point?
President, Congressman, I can't speak to or disclose the substance of discussions with the president or his advisors to protect the executive branch confidentiality.
I appreciate that, but I will tell you, in going through this report, there is no evidence, no indicia that the president ever asked that you or Mr. Sessions stop the Mueller investigation. In fact, the Mueller investigation went on unimpeded. Thousands of interviews, millions of documents. And with that, my time has expired, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Lewandowski, I'm going to put a slide up, and it's the words that President Trump dictated to you on July 19. Can you read what you wrote down?
I'm happy to have you read it, Congressman.
Well, why don't you want to read it, Mr. Lewandowski?
I think you should afford me the same privilege you afforded Director Mueller.
Would you like to read it?
No, you're welcome to read it.
Are you ashamed of the words that you wrote down?
President Swalwell, I'm very happy of what I've written, but you're welcome to read it if you'd like.
Are you ashamed to read it out loud?
I'm not ashamed of anything in my life, Congressman, are you?
Then why don't you read the words?
Congressman, I've asked and answered your
Mr.
question.
Lewandowski, why won't you read the words aloud?
I've asked and answered your question, Congressman. If you'd like to read the words, you're welcome to.
Well, you were ashamed to read them out loud, and you didn't deliver those words to the person the president asked you to. Did you have a consciousness of guilt?
I have nothing to be guilty of, Congressman. Thank you.
You still feel guilty today, and that's why you can't read it out loud?
Congressman, you're welcome to read the words if you'd like.
Well, I just wonder why you can't.
I have the capacity to, Congressman. I'll give you the privilege.
You said the president did nothing wrong. Why can't you read those words right now? Why can't you read them aloud?
Congressman, tell me why you hold me to a different standard than the previous witnesses who sat here.
I want to give you one more opportunity to clear up something you said earlier. You've said a number of times it was in the Mueller report, it was accurate, except as it relates to you stating that this was the only time the president ever asked you to write something down. Are you saying that that part's not accurate? And I'd ask to stop the clock while he confers with his lawyer.
The clock will be stopped for 5 seconds.
Could I see the page and reference number on that, Congressman?
Sure. It's page 91, lines 7 and 8. I will read it to you. This was the first time the president had asked Lewandowski to take dictation. Are you saying that that is not accurate?
The committee will come to order. We'll reconvene. When we left, we were about to have the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, America learned today that no one else would do what the president asked of you. Not McGahn, not Sessions, not Dearborn, and to the president's disappointment, not even you. Yet it was very important that you maintain a good relationship with the president, because after you left Trump campaign in December of 2016, you co-founded Avenue Strategies. Isn't that right?
Yes, it is.
I'm reading from their website. Avenue Strategies describes itself as having, quote, a core focus on government affairs, public affairs, strategic consulting, public relations, and crisis management to engage policymakers in our clients' behalf. That's what Avenue's website said. Am I right?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't worked there in 2 years.
Okay, but that was the pitch when you did work there.
Yeah, I couldn't speak to that.
And you were pitching clients on your ability to engage policymakers. That means government access was important to you, yes or no?
No.
Okay, you couldn't engage policymakers without having access. And you did have access to the president. You acknowledged, and in fact, I would say you boasted, you were very close with the president. Isn't that so?
I think it's a fair assessment that I'm close to the president. Yes, Congresswoman.
You visited him many times in the Oval Office. You called him on the phone. You had access that others didn't. It was important to you, wasn't it?
What was important to me? Speaking to the president?
Your access.
No.
Okay. And yet you did use that access to pitch clients. As I said, in December of 2016, you co-founded Avenue Strategies. And on December 17th of that same year, you took a business trip to Mexico to meet with Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim. Is that right?
It is.
Politico reported you traveled to Mexico on a business development trip with Slim. When you met with Slim, you pitched consulting services with him, yes?
No, that's fake news.
Oh, you met with Slim. You didn't pitch your brand new endeavor, your new enterprise. Did you tell him you could get a meeting at that time with then President-elect Trump?
Not that I recall, no.
I'm showing you a slide. Isn't it a fact that just 3 days later, on December 20th, Trump tweeted a presidential statement, a quote, yes, it's true, Carlos Slim, the great businessman from Mexico, called me about getting together for a meeting. We met, all caps. He's a great guy, exclamation point. And Slim did actually meet with the president-elect Trump a few days later, isn't that right?
I'm not certain.
This is all coincidence, I suppose. In fact, his spokesperson explained that Slim's quote, sit down at Trump Mar-a-Lago resort came days after Lewandowski had traveled to Mexico on a business development trip and met with Slim. You also proposed to do work for a payday lender, Community Choice Financial. Isn't that correct?
I think the previous company I was working with did that work.
Okay, and you met or had some engagement with that client. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Well, I'll try to refresh your recollection. A source from that meeting said you pledged that you, quote, would get Trump to fire that company's arch nemesis, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau head, Richard Cordray. I think you'll see the slide reveals that, if they hired you and your firm Avenue. Is that source accurate?
No.
Oh, they're lying too?
No, it's called fake news, Congressman. I'm sure you've never been misquoted.
Well, isn't it true, Mr. Lewandowski, that a few months later, in a live Meet the Press interview, you called for President Trump to oust CFPB Director Richard Cordray? Let me play you that clip now.
It's my recommendation to the President of the United States to fire Richard Cordray.
Another coincidence that you are pitching what your client wants you to pitch. Coincidence?
Congressman, how is this relevant to the hearing?
I'll ask the questions.
Okay.
Mr. Lewandowski, you met with representatives from Facebook and Blackstone to pitch them on Avenue services as well. Am I correct?
No, I don't recall that.
You don't recall that. Do you recall actually saying that you had access to the president's Twitter account?
Those words never came out of my mouth, Congresswoman.
Did you ever claim to have access?
Not to the best of my knowledge, Congresswoman.
Did you ever have access to the president's Twitter account?
I don't recall.
You don't recall if you had access to the president's Twitter account?
I don't believe I've ever had access.
Memorable to me.
Well, his Twitter follower is large, but I don't believe I've ever had access to his Twitter account.
Okay. I have just a few seconds left. Mr. Lewandowski, your role as the president's enforcer has evaporated. You can protect him no longer. Mr. Chairman, on this 223rd Constitution Day, we could not be in a more important place in this Judiciary Committee, proving to the American people that their Constitution, our Constitution, is stronger than a president in search of corruption and cover-up. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, my colleagues have gone through some unbelievable acts by the president attempting to obstruct an investigation into his conduct and then to cover it up. That cover-up has extended to preventing witnesses from coming to talk to this committee without any lawful basis of doing so. Let me just be very clear. We are right now in the United States of America, and we have a president who is obstructing our congressional investigation into his misconduct. And we know why he's doing this. The president wants to prevent witnesses from testifying to Congress and the American people because he wants to hide his misconduct. We've heard the name Rick Dearborn a lot today, the former deputy chief of staff.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
On August...
The gentlelady will suspend. The gentlelady will suspend. The gentleman will state his point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just ask, without following through, is the gentlelady accusing the president of a crime?
What did she say?
I can read.
Yeah, she can reword. I'll be happy to withdraw.
I am not accusing anyone of anything. Can I continue? Can I reclaim my time, please?
Not if you continue in the vein you're continuing with the question saying that he committed a
Collins,
crime.
this is not a reality TV show.
Not for
this
you
is a
either.
serious judiciary committee hearing.
Then ask
we
serious
are
questions.
trying to investigate
Gentlemen,
misconduct by the president.
Gentleman has,
May I continue, Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman has stated his point of order. The gentlelady may continue at
Thank
her
you.
time.
On August 26th, the committee served a subpoena on Rick Dearborn to appear here today. You testified that you gave Dearborn the message dictated to him by the president. We went over that message today. It asked the Attorney General to direct the special counsel not to investigate the president. But that's not all. Mr. Dearborn was also Jeff Sessions' chief of staff during the Trump campaign. In that role, Dearborn coordinated meetings for candidate Trump and the Trump campaign, meetings that were organized by Russian organizations. Dearborn himself communicated with Russian officials. But once again, the president is trying to prevent us from learning the truth about his conduct. Let's be honest here. Mr. Dearborn is not here today because the president is afraid of what he would tell us and the American people. The president directed him not to appear based on a fake claim of absolute immunity. And even though we can't hear from this important witness about the president's potential obstruction of justice, I will share some of the subjects that I would have asked Mr. Dearborn if he were here today. Mr. Lewandowski, we heard that the president directed you to deliver a message to the Attorney General. You asked Dearborn to deliver the message dictated to you by the president, correct?
Can you remind me what page that's in the Mueller report?
Volume 2, page 92, right in the middle of the page.
Okay, thank you.
Right under point 2. Following his June meeting with the president.
I believe that's accurate. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And you gave Dearborn that message and asked him to deliver it?
I believe that's accurate. Yes.
Thank you. Well, what we know is that Dearborn did not deliver your secret message. In fact, he told the special counsel, quote, and you can see it on the screen, being asked to serve as a messenger to Sessions made Dearborn uncomfortable. It definitely raised an eyebrow. Dearborn recalled not wanting to ask where it came from or think further about doing anything with it. And as soon as the president learned that Dearborn knew and told the special counsel how bad it was, he's directed him now not to come in front of this committee to testify. So it's no wonder the president wants to prevent Dearborn from testifying, because we would be able to ask him why he wanted nothing further to do with the president's conduct, why he was so uncomfortable he didn't deliver that message. In fact, Dearborn, as an actual government employee, was familiar with the Presidential Records Act. He knew that any official business must be documented, but he did not keep the notes. The president doesn't want us to know why Dearborn didn't even want to keep that message. Dearborn also knew the White House policy that any messages to the Attorney General were supposed to go through the White House counsel. The president doesn't want us to ask Dearborn why it was so wrong for the president to call in his private enforcer instead of the White House counsel. So again, let's make something very clear here today. Presidents of the United States cannot ignore congressional subpoenas. Richard Nixon learned this. His impeachment proceedings had an article of impeachment based on doing exactly that. No president can be allowed to violate his or her constitutional duties, nor can any president be allowed to obstruct a congressional investigation or hide crimes. We will not sit back and let this president continue to obstruct justice any longer. Let me remind everyone that in this country, no one is above the law. Thank you. I yield back my time.
I still move to take down her words.
Which words do you want taken down?
She will no longer allow this president to obstruct justice. She cannot do that.
I will rule that she can do that.
Fill the ruling of the chair then.
Fine. The ruling of the... We'll suspend, the gentleman, we will suspend for a moment. In the interest of time, I will ask the gentlelady if she would withdraw that characterization.
But it is against the House rules.
Can I say no president can be allowed to obstruct?
You certainly can.
Okay. And we won't allow any president to continue to obstruct justice? Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Representative.
You want to say
Collins.
that?
Let's say that.
Okay. Does she have any time left? All right, the gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing and those we've held previously have outlined serious evidence of obstruction of justice. The president didn't just attempt to obstruct the special counsel's investigation, but he is also obstructing our congressional investigation into his conduct. The president has instructed a number of witnesses to ignore our subpoenas in order to hide his wrongdoing from the American people. One of those witnesses is Rob Porter, the former White House staff secretary, who was served with a subpoena by this committee on August 26th. Rob Porter was prominently featured in the special counsel Robert Mueller's report with a detailed description of efforts to obstruct justice. The report describes the president directing then White House counsel Don McGahn to fire the special counsel and then ordering him to lie about it. The committee has many questions for Mr. Porter, but the president doesn't want us asking those questions. So the president directed Mr. Porter not to appear based on a bogus claim of absolute immunity, a pattern by this president to cover up his obstruction efforts. Let me be clear, Mr. Dearborn is not here today either for the same reason. The president's fear of what we and the American people could learn from their testimony. But their absence won't stop our oversight, and I will still go through items I would have covered with Mr. Porter. On January 25th, 2018, the New York Times reported, and it's up on the slide, quote, the president had ordered McGahn to have the Department of Justice fire the special counsel. After the news broke, the president went on TV and denied the story. But this is all public. Following the article, the president pressured McGahn to put out a statement denying he had been asked to fire the special counsel, but McGahn refused. McGahn's attorney told the president's attorney that, quote, the Times story was accurate in reporting that the president wanted the special counsel removed. The president didn't drop the issue. He then used Rob Porter to convince McGahn to make a false denial. The president told Porter that the article was, quote, bullshit, that he never tried to terminate the special counsel. The president said that McGahn leaked to the media to make himself look good. But we know from the special counsel's report that what the president told Porter was not true. In fact, the report proves that the president did ask McGahn to fire the special counsel over and over again, and McGahn refused. That's pretty bad, but it gets worse. According to the special counsel's report, quote, the president then directed Porter to tell McGahn to create a record to make clear that the president never directed McGahn to fire the special counsel. To be clear, the president asked Porter to tell McGahn to create a false record to hide the president's conduct. The president was so desperate to hide his misconduct that he even told Porter to threaten McGahn if he did not create the written denial. In fact, the president said, quote, if he doesn't write a letter, then maybe I'll have to get rid of him. Porter delivered that threat, but McGahn stood firm and refused to assist the president's misconduct. This should ring a bell. It's like the threat the president asked you, Mr. Lewandowski, to deliver to Jeff Sessions. Now the president is attempting to bully his witnesses and directed you, Mr. Lewandowski, not to answer our questions under our subpoena. We will not let this cover-up stand. That is why we are pursuing this impeachment investigation.
Obstruction of Congress, ignoring congressional subpoenas, is a serious offense. Nixon learned this. The third article of impeachment against Nixon explained that he was, quote, violating his constitutional duty by blocking evidence under duly authorized subpoenas issued by this committee. Today, the president is doing just that, willfully disobeying subpoenas in order to cover up his conduct. I will now yield the remainder of my time to our chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lewandowski. Your behavior in this hearing room has been completely unacceptable, and it is part of a pattern by a White House desperate for the American people not to hear the truth. I have been asked several times today whether the committee will hold you in contempt. That is certainly under consideration. But there is a far more troubling level of contempt on display here today, and that is President Trump's role in your refusal to answer questions. The pattern of obstruction laid out in the Mueller report has not stopped. You showed the American public in real time that the Trump administration will do anything and everything in its power to obstruct the work of the Congress. The president's lawyers are sitting behind you right now to make sure that you do not answer us. Well, this committee is focused on the evidence of potential corruption, obstruction, and abuse of power. And exposing that misconduct is our top priority. Make no mistake, we will hold President Trump accountable.
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Chairman, did you have that little speech prepared before this hearing went downhill?
It is not a proper parliamentary inquiry, and the answer is no. Pursuant to the resolution for investigative procedures adopted by this committee last week, and pursuant to notice, we will now proceed to staff questioning.
Mr. Chairman,
the majority has designated Barry Burke to conduct its questioning.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Clause 2J. Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
Clause 2J, 2C of Rule 11 permits up to 1 hour of questioning by staff of this committee. This gentleman is a private consultant.
You're talking too fast. I can't understand you. I'm sorry.
This gentleman is a private consultant whose very consultant contract explicitly states that he is not an employee of this committee, not a government employee. Congressional handbook states in explicit terms, consultants contracted to work for standing committees, 2 U.S.C. 4301, are explicitly not employees of the committee. House Admin Committee will not even approve a contract for a consultant that will be performing regular or normal duties of committee staff. Any attempt to suggest that someone can simultaneously be an employee of the committee and not be an employee of the committee and committee staff defies even the most attenuated logic. The majority's use of private sector consultants to question witnesses constitutes an egregious violation of House rules under any circumstances. Under the circumstances of the current so-called impeachment inquiry, it would constitute an unprecedented privatization of impeachment. I have the employment contract here of the gentleman, Mr. Barry Burke, and also have the letter in which you are asking a question. Also have the staff role, which he is not listed as a staff member. He is a private consultant. Point of order is he should not be able to allow questioning of this witness. I have no problem because you've already run through and bullied through last week a staff questioning. If you have fine staff, if your staff asks questions, I will withdraw the point of order, but Mr. Burke or Mr. Norman is neither one allowed to ask questions under this rule. And Ms. Lofgren's committee is here, and we do have committee staff from House Admin who agrees with this interpretation.
I am prepared to rule on the point of order. For the purposes of staff questioning under the resolution adopted by the committee on September 12, 2019, there is no distinction between staff and consultants. First, the chair has significant discretion to determine who qualifies as staff for the purposes of the resolution. Committee consultants, in effect, function as staff for all intents and purposes. They are paid out of the committee's budget, they work at the chairman's discretion, and they are subject to all the same ethical and legal responsibilities as any other House employee. Second, the committee's retention of consultants is consistent with prior committee practice. Committee consultants have been retained to question witnesses at hearings and other proceedings, and they've assisted with significant investigations, including impeachment investigations. For example, David Shippers, the consultant to the majority, and Abby Lowell to the minority during the Clinton impeachment investigation. Committee consultants have questioned witnesses without objection from members. In fact, just last Congress, the Republican majority of this committee hired consultants to assist with their investigation into former Secretary of State Clinton's emails, and they regularly ask questions during transcribed interviews and other matters connected with that investigation. Our consultants were retained specifically to assist the committee perform its oversight and investigative functions, which is the purpose of today's hearing. Accordingly, I overrule the point of order.
Mr. Chairman, let's continue this for a second because this is an important part.
Do you wish to appeal the ruling of the chair?
Mr. Chairman.
What?
Mr.
I'm sorry, you can be heard on the point of order.
Thank you. Because, Mr. Chairman, you're going down a very interesting road here, and this is an interesting road that we've already discussed, and undoubtedly you had a very big misunderstanding of just a few minutes ago. We are not in an impeachment inquiry. We're not. You may want it to be, you may think it is, and if you want to go to the floor right now, I'm sure they'll clear floor time for us and you can bring your privilege resolution for an impeachment inquiry. You can, but you don't have the votes. But you can't just make it up on the fly. And the chairwoman of the administration committee is here, that we have talked to our committee staff on that part. They would not ever agree that a contract employee is a staff member. The folks that you just named were after an impeachment inquiry was formed. They were hired for that specific purpose. Now, if you want to continue this, this is a violation of the House rules. This is a privilege resolution for the House rules. We've already had today the problematic issue of overstepping time. But this one, Mr. Chairman, is one that cannot go forward. This is one that you have great staff members. They are legally staffed. They fit every definition, and no contract approved by the House Admin Committee, including the chairman who is on this committee, can actually contract services to be provided by a consultant that are regular, normal business of a committee staff. This is regular, normal committee oversight if you want to have it. Even when you dress it up, it doesn't matter. This is not anything different. And to continue down this path puts your entire line already in question by millions of people, but a questioning committee to this House puts us in jeopardy because if it's win at all costs, Mr. Chairman, then we got a problem.
Mr. Chairman.
If it's win at all costs, we got a problem.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a question for the chair.
Who's 60?
I just have a question.
No, questions are not in order. We're discussing a point of order.
I have a question on the point of order.
Then you're recognized.
If they're staff, why were they called consultants in their employment contract?
That's not a point of order.
Well, let me ask, Mr. Chairman, let me ask about this. Did the rule change last week, 1 week ago today, that we voted on, that you voted for, we voted against? Did it mention the word consultants in the rule changes that were adopted by the committee?
I can't hear what he's saying because you're talking.
Chairman, regular order.
Yes, I cannot hear what Mr. Jordan is saying because Mr. Collins is talking too.
The resolution that the majority adopted last week, was the word consultant mentioned in there when it came relative to the ability of staff to ask questions?
It was not.
It was not. So let me get this straight. You changed the rules last week, and now this week you're not going to follow the rules you changed.
We are, all right. I am going to rule on the point of order.
Mr. Chairman.
No, I'm going to rule on the point of order.
I'd like to speak towards the point of order.
It is not in order to have a debate on a point of order. The gentleman made his point of order.
They're not an employee of the committee, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman, you've made that point. That's your point of order. I am prepared to rule on it.
But may I be heard on a point of personal privilege?
Gentlelady.
Since my name has been invoked, I have ascertained that, in fact, the staff director for the House Administration Committee has not been solicited for his information.
Did not ask your staff director, ask ours.
Okay.
Fine.
Now,
because you're at this point.
I yield back, Mr.
Because
Chair.
we go back. The issue here, though, is
the issue here was stated already by you. You don't have to repeat it.
No, this is be careful going down this road, Mr. Chairman.
You made your point, and I'm going to rule on it.
Be careful, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to be very careful.
The steamroller.
Number one, we are in an impeachment investigation, but that is, whether or not we are, is not relevant to this question. So we're not going to debate whether.
Yes, it is.
It is not relevant to that question.
But now you just changed from investigation to inquiry. I mean, which is it?
That is not relevant to this question. The committee's retention of consultants is consistent with prior committee practice. Consultants have been retained to question witnesses at hearings and at other proceedings, not only in impeachment hearings. This is consistent with past practice. I so rule. I overrule the point of order.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary.
The point of order is overruled.
Parliamentary.
And unless someone wants to ask for a vote on the point of order.
Now, Mr. Chairman.
Do you wish to ask? Do you wish to vote on?
No, I want to talk. I want to ask you a question here because
the point of order.
Regular order, Mr. Chairman.
The point of order. You raised a point of. You were recognized for the purpose of raising a point of question. You raised it. I ruled on it. Do you wish to appeal the ruling of the chair? Yes or no?
Yes.
I move to table, Mr. Chairman.
What?
I move to table the appeal of the ruling.
This is a sad day. This is a sad day for this.
The ruling of the chair is appealed. The gentlelady moves to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair. The clerk will call the roll. The clerk will call the roll on the question of approving the motion to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair.
Can you get on that? Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren?
Yes.
Ms. Lofgren votes yes. Ms. Jackson Lee?
Aye.
Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson of Georgia?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass? Mr. Richmond? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Cicilline? Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes aye. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes aye. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon?
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath? Mr. Stanton? Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Mucarsel-Powell? Ms. Mucarsel-Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins? Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Gomert? Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Radcliffe? Ms. Roby? Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
No.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko? Mr. Rechtenthaler? Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Cohen votes aye.
Has everyone voted who wishes to vote? You okay? The clerk will report. No, wait. We're still waiting for someone.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
We're in the middle of the vote.
Oh, you're not having called the roll? Okay.
The gentleman from Arizona? Has the gentleman from Arizona been recorded?
Mr. Stanton, you voted aye.
Everyone, you waiting for anybody else yet? Okay, the clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 19 ayes and 8 noes.
The point of order, the motion to table the appeal of the ruling of the chair is agreed to. The majority has designated Barry Burke to conduct this questioning. Mr. Burke, you are now recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry before Mr. Burke begins.
I had one too.
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned earlier that there were consultants who had been used to question witnesses, and so I'm just going to ask as a parliamentary inquiry, what were the parliamentary occurrences where a consultant...
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. That's
committee...
not a parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman is correct. That is not a parliamentary inquiry.
Very well, I have a point of order.
Who else has a parliamentary inquiry? Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, was today's witness, Mr. Lewandowski, when he was subpoenaed, was he notified that consultants would be questioning him?
That is not a parliamentary inquiry either.
That's a procedural, important procedural question.
Mr. Burke
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Burke is recognized for 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn.
The motion to adjourn is in order and is not debatable. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
What? No.
Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes no. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes no. Ms. Bass? Mr. Richmond? Mr. Jeffries? Mr. Cicilline?
No.
Mr. Cicilline votes no. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes no. Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin votes no. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes no. Ms. Demings? Ms. Demings votes no. Mr. Correa? Mr. Correa votes no. Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Ms. Garcia?
No.
Ms. Garcia votes no. Mr. Neguse? No. Mr. Neguse votes no. Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes no. Mr. Stanton?
No.
Mr. Stanton votes no. Ms. Dean?
No.
Ms. Dean votes no. Ms. Mucarsel-Powell?
No.
Ms. Mucarsel-Powell votes no. Ms. Escobar?
No.
Ms. Escobar votes no. Mr. Collins?
To adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Mr. Collins votes aye. Mr. Sensenbrenner? Mr. Shabbat? Mr. Gomert? Mr. Jordan? Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Buck? Mr. Ratcliffe? Ms. Roby? Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes yes. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Ms. Lesko? Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Gates, you are not recorded. Mr. Gates votes aye.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 20 noes.
The motion to adjourn is not agreed to. Mr. Burke is recognized for 30 minutes.
First, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Who has a point of parliamentary inquiry? The gentleman will state his point of parliamentary.
My parliamentary
The gentleman
inquiry.
will state his point of parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My inquiry is this. It relates to the rule that we changed last week, where we mentioned staff would conduct the questioning, and it's been expanded to include consultants today. My question is, did we contemplate that the distinction between independent contractors such as a consultant...
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Did we contemplate what?
Did we contemplate independent contractors such as a consultant would be vis-a-vis employees, which is what the staff would be, as being part of the distinction when that rule was changed last week?
The gentlelady from...
Point of order, Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Chairman, the advice I've received from the top staff person at the House Administration Committee is that staff can be comprised of employees, interns, detailees, fellows, contractors, etc. Staff and employee are not equivalent terms. And I yield back.
So may I, would the gentlelady yield to a question?
Certainly.
So my question would be, is the Committee on House Administration indicated to me anyway that will not approve a contract if the services to be provided by the consultant are the regular and normal duties of committee staff? Are you saying that this, I mean, I was under the impression that this was not extraordinary.
That's not pertinent to this proceeding. I'd happy after the meeting to go through, but this was signed off by the committee itself. It met all of our requirements.
The gentleman has not stated a parliamentary inquiry. Time is Mr. Burke's. The gentleman, Mr. Burke has 30 minutes. Is recognized for 30 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, I'm counsel for Mr. Lewandowski. I need about 30 seconds to register a formal protest, Mr. Chairman.
You are not a witness, and you should not be seated at that table.
I understand that, and I'm going to leave as soon as I can register this formal protest based upon the debate that I've just heard. These seem to be unauthorized questions, and I know you choose your words carefully, and I will leave it to Mr. Lewandowski to decide, but it is my view that he should not answer
Point of order, Mr.
unauthorized
Chairman. We're not
questions.
interested in your view, sir. We have a hearing to conduct.
The gentleman's point is
That's
well taken.
his legal counsel.
We are having a hearing to conduct.
Point of order. I don't believe Mr. Cicilline stated a rule.
Mr. Lewandowski will answer all questions. If he has a legitimate privilege to assert, he may, of course, assert the legitimate privilege. Other than that, he is under subpoena. He will answer all questions. This is being done pursuant to the committee's rules. And if his counsel doesn't like it, you don't interpret our rules, with all due respect.
Right, and these were, well, my point is, Mr. Chairman, these are unauthorized questions.
Mr. Burke is recognized for 30 minutes.
Mr. Lewandowski, did you ever become concerned that the president had asked you to do something that could expose you to criminal liability? Did you ever become concerned that the President of the United States had asked you to do something that could expose you to criminal liability?
Was I concerned that the President asked me to do something? Not to the best of my knowledge.
Were you ever concerned that the President had asked you to do something that put you in harm's way, made you feel that you were in trouble?
I think I've asked and answered that question.
Sir, I'd like to show you a video of an interview you did on Fox News. This was on January 16th, 2018.
Oh, take the fifth. Look, you take the fifth when you're in trouble. I didn't do anything, and the campaign didn't do anything. And so I have no reason to take the fifth. I'm going to answer every question.
Sir, you were answering that with regard to your appearance before the House Intelligence Committee. You say you take the fifth when you were in trouble. You didn't do anything, so you were going to testify, and you weren't going to take the fifth before that committee with regard to questions about the campaign. Were you concerned, sir, that you had done something with regard to delivering or agreeing to deliver the president's message, and therefore you could get in trouble based on what you agreed to do and attempted to do?
I have no concerns.
Isn't it a fact, sir, that contrary to your testimony that you voluntarily appeared in front of the special counsel, when you were called to provide answers to the special counsel, you indicated your intent to assert your rights under the Fifth Amendment not to self-incriminate? Is that true?
Not to the best of my recollection. Is that in the report, sir?
Isn't that true, sir, that you refused to testify without receiving immunity?
I don't believe that's accurate. I'd be happy if you could show me that is in the report. I'd be happy to answer it.
Sir, is it your testimony under oath that you never received immunity prior to answering questions of the special counsel?
That's a question for Special Counsel Mueller, and I won't be answering mechanics of the investigation.
My question to you, sir, is did you refuse to answer the special counsel's questions without getting a grant of immunity protecting you from having your words used against you in a criminal prosecution?
I've asked and answered your question.
Are you denying, sir, that you refused to answer questions and asserted your rights under the Fifth Amendment not to self-incriminate unless the special counsel gave you immunity?
I've asked and answered your question, sir.
Sir, do you agree with your statement that you would assert the Fifth Amendment if you believed you were in trouble, to quote your words to Fox News?
I don't think I was under any obligation when speaking to Fox News to not engage in hyperbole if I so chose. I was not under oath at any time during that discussion, but I've been very forthright today.
Is it still your testimony, sir, that you made under oath earlier that you appeared voluntarily before the special counsel and not under a grant of immunity?
To the best of my recollection, I appeared in front of the special counsel voluntarily.
Did you receive immunity, sir?
Look, as Director Mueller stated, when asked about Don Jr.'s communication to special counsel, his intent to invoke the Fifth Amendment right, Director Mueller said, and I quote, "I'm not going to answer that." So if you want to direct that question to Director Mueller, it's on page 77 of the report, you're welcome to do so.
Did you receive immunity, sir?
I've asked and answered your question.
Sir, let me ask you, have you ever been untruthful about being asked to answer questions of the special counsel?
I've already testified. I've been honest to the best of my ability.
Sir, let me show you another clip, and this one was from March 25th, 2018, from Meet the Press, March 25th, 2018.
Have you met with the special counsel, Robert Mueller? I know you've testified before the Senate and the House intel investigations. What about the special counsel?
Look, I have said very candidly, I'll be happy to speak with the special counsel if they'd like to do that. I've been very open about, I volunteered to testify for 12 hours in front of the House committee. I've testified in front of the Senate committee, and I'll make myself available because I was there at the very beginning of the campaign.
Have they asked for you yet, though? Have they asked for you?
Not yet, no.
You've
No,
not
they
been
haven't
subpoenaed,
yet, Chuck,
nothing? Okay.
Sir, was that truthful, what you said on national television on March 25th, 2018, that the special counsel had not asked to speak to you at that date?
I don't know if they asked to speak to me by that date.
So you know your interview that's reported in the special counsel report was on April 6th, 2018.
Is that accurate? Is that the day of the interview?
Yes.
If that's what the report says, and I'll take it to be accurate.
And sir, you made public statements denying that you had been asked to give answers to the special counsel when you actually had. You had been untruthful about that. Isn't that true, sir?
Are we talking about a discussion with the media or in front of a committee of jurisdiction where I've been sworn to testify?
I'm talking about your public statements to the American public on
Oh, I'm sorry. Nobody in front of Congress has ever lied to the public before. I'm sorry.
Sir, is that an admission that you did lie?
Absolutely not.
Oh, so did you lie, sir, in television interviews denying that you'd been asked to give answers to the special counsel?
I don't believe so.
So you deny that you ever lied in public statements about whether you were asked?
What I'm saying is, when under oath, I've always told the truth, whether it was before special counsel, whether it was before the House Judiciary Committee, whether it was before the House Intelligence Committee on 2 separate occasions, or before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Every time I've raised my right hand to God, I've sworn and told the truth.
That's not my question to you, sir. We'll get to that. My question to you, sir, is on national television, did you lie about your relationship with the special counsel and whether they sought your interview?
I don't know.
And sir, did you lie about it because you didn't want the world to find out that you were afraid you could be exposed to criminal liability and you were only going to appear as to certain issues with a grant of immunity, protecting your words from being used against you in a criminal prosecution?
I'm going to go back to what Director Mueller stated. He's not going to answer that question. I'm not going to allow you to use me as a backdoor into his methods. If you'd like to question Director Mueller about the way of the investigation techniques of the Justice Department, you've had that opportunity to do so, but clearly you didn't. So take him back here, bring him before the committee, and ask those questions. Those questions are not for me.
Let me ask you this, sir. Prior to the Mueller report being published in redacted form, did you ever misrepresent what you did on behalf of the president?
I can't think of an instance where that would have occurred.
Let me show you an interview that you did on May 14th, 2019. Excuse me. I'm going to show it to you from February 22nd, 2019. Let me show it to you. Excuse me, May 14th, 2019. Thank you.
I don't ever remember the president ever asking me to get involved with Jeff Sessions or the Department of Justice in any way, shape, or form ever.
Did you hear that, sir? That was you saying on MSNBC, you don't ever remember the president ever asking you to get involved with Jeff Sessions or the Department of Justice in any way, shape, or form. That wasn't true, was it, sir?
I heard that.
And that was not true, was it?
I have no obligation to be honest with the media because they're just as dishonest as anybody else.
So you're admitting, sir, you were not being truthful in that clip, correct?
My interview with Ari Melberg
Yes.
can be interpreted any way you'd like.
Would you like me to play it again?
You're welcome to, please.
Play one more time.
I don't ever remember the president ever asking me to get involved with Jeff Sessions or the Department of Justice in any way, shape, or form ever.
And, sir, it is true in May 2019, you absolutely remembered when the president asked you to deliver a message to the Attorney General of a speech for him to give related to the special counsel investigation. Isn't that correct?
I'd have to think about it.
Are you claiming, sir, that, and you had been interviewed by the special counsel about those very events in which you discussed and you said was accurately reported in the report a year earlier. Are you saying, sir, you may have forgotten it by the time you were interviewed just before the report was publicly released?
I'm saying my memory was clearly much fresher when I actually gave the interview with the special counsel's report.
Sir, is it your testimony before this committee that when you said you did not remember the president ever asking you to get involved with Jeff Sessions or the Department of Justice, you were saying you were being truthful? And, sir, I don't believe there's any reason to consult with your counsel. The question is, are you a truth teller in that interview?
I'm a truth teller every time I stand before Congress or a committee of jurisdiction and raise my hand and swear to God under oath.
My question, sir, is when you said the president never asked you to get involved with Mr. Sessions.
I have no obligation to have a candid conversation with the media whatsoever, just like they have no obligation to cover me honestly, and they do it inaccurately all the time.
So you're admitting that on national television you were lying there.
What I'm saying is they have been inaccurate on many occasions, and perhaps I was inaccurate at that time.
So I want to remind you you're under oath. And am I right, sir, that the reason why you didn't admit that the president had asked you to deliver a message to the Attorney General about investigations because you knew it was wrong and you were concerned about your own exposure and you didn't have immunity in that interview? Isn't that correct?
Which interview?
The one we just watched where you lied about the president asking you to deliver a message.
I didn't know I could get immunity from a media outlet.
I want to clarify the date of that interview was February 22nd, 2019, just to be clear. The date is February 22nd, as I originally stated, 2019. Sir, let me ask you a question. Did you
So what was the inaccuracy earlier? Because I missed that.
Sir, let me ask you, did you say that because you wanted to protect the president?
Not to the best of my recollection.
Sir, did you deny it because you wanted to protect yourself?
Not to the best of my recollection, Mr. Burke.
Why did you lie on national television, sir, about the president giving you a message to the Attorney General about the special counsel's investigation?
I don't recall that particular day and my mindset at the time, so I couldn't answer that.
Can you offer any explanation for why you would lie on national TV other than concern about protecting yourself and the president?
Well, I know previously the chairman asked witnesses not to guess, so I'd prefer not to guess unless the chairman has changed his tune on that.
So you can't give me any other explanation except you're concerned that you or the president could be criminally exposed based on what you attempted to do on his behalf. Is that correct?
I didn't say that.
Can you give me any explanation?
I said if you'd like me to take a guess, which the chairman has asked previous witnesses that he didn't want guessing, if we're changing the rules of the committee once again, I'll be happy to try and take a guess with the caveats that I don't recall that particular interview. I'm not exactly sure where I was the time it transpired. I don't exactly remember that particular day and what was transpiring in my life. I'd be happy to take that caveat. And with that said, I don't recall it.
Sir, let me ask you about your earlier testimony a few minutes ago that you're truthful when you take an oath, as you did earlier today before this committee. I'd like to put up a slide that you were asked about earlier, if I may. And this is the actual statement that you made to the special counsel that you said was accurate. I'm quoting. That's a direct quote. It's right in front of you, sir, on the screen. That's a direct quote from the report on page 92. And it said Lewandowski did not want to meet at the Department of Justice because he did not want a public log of his visit. You were asked about that. Now, sir, do you deny that you told the special counsel you did not want a public log of your visit with the Attorney General?
I believe I've answered that question, but I don't deny that that is an accurate representation of what I've told the special counsel.
Okay. And is it an accurate representation of what you said before, which I didn't quite follow, that you did not want a public log of your visit because you wanted to have a casual dinner with the special counsel, and that's why you didn't want there to be a record of your visit? Is that your testimony earlier today, sir?
I had no interest in having a casual dinner with the special counsel, no, sir.
I'm sorry, with the Attorney General, sir.
Are you clarifying the question?
I am, sir.
Okay, could you repeat it, please?
Yes, sir. Your earlier testimony was that the reason you didn't want a public log is because you wanted to have a casual dinner with the Attorney General. Was that your earlier testimony?
That seems to be accurate.
Sir, having a casual dinner with the Attorney General has nothing to do with why you wouldn't want a public log of your visit with the Attorney General, does it?
It does.
There isn't, in fact, you didn't want a public log because you knew what you're doing was wrong. So that just as the president went to an unofficial non-government employee, you wanted to make sure there was not a record of it. Isn't that right, sir?
No.
So do you agree that if a log creates a record of your visiting with the Attorney General?
I would think a log would create a record, yes.
And do you agree, sir, that you admitted to the special counsel you didn't want to have a record of your visit? And that's one of the reasons why you didn't go to the Department of Justice, because you did not want a public log of your visit, correct?
I've never been to the Department of Justice. I don't know what goes on in the Department of Justice. I don't really want to find out what happened in the Department of Justice based on what's happened to other people involving the Department of Justice, to be honest with you.
Sir, my question to you is, you say you didn't go because you didn't want a public log of your visit.
Are you asking me the same question I've just answered? Yeah, I have stipulated to the fact that what is in the Mueller report about a public log is accurate to the best of my recollection. I'll be happy to answer it again, but it's still accurate to the best of my recollection.
That's because you didn't want a public record of it, correct?
I believe I've said, my quote is, did not want to meet at the Department of Justice because he did not want a public log. That is a quote that somebody in the special counsel's team clearly referenced as something I've said, although I don't think I would have spoken about myself in the third party.
And you also said, sir, that you didn't want the Attorney General to have an advantage over you. Is that correct?
I think that's also an accurate representation in the report, but I'd have to be made aware of where that is again.
On page 92, it's quoted right in front of you. So I ask you, sir, again, if you didn't think you were doing anything wrong and you weren't being brought in to pressure and bully the Attorney General, why did you not want him to have an advantage over you?
Jeff and I were friends and have been friends. And seeing him in a social environment where we could sit down and have a meal, whether at his house, my house, or a Washington, D.C. restaurant, to have a conversation was something I thought was better for the both of us.
Sir, isn't that true that that has nothing to do with the question of whether you wanted that you didn't want him to have an advantage over you? That was because you were trying to assert leverage as the president wanted you to give him message about what he should say about the special counsel's investigation.
No, Mr. Burke.
Sir, let me show you another quote, statement that you made in a Fox News interview on April 19, 2019.
Yeah, I never delivered any document to Jeff Sessions. I never had an in-depth conversation with Senator Sessions or Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Yeah. Look, I've spoken to Attorney General Sessions on dozens of occasions, but never did I ask him to interfere with the Mueller investigation. Never did I ask him to, do anything other than what was completely legal, which was continue to do his job.
Now, sir, that was April 19th. I'll represent you. That was the day after the redacted Mueller report came out on April 18th. Sir, you said you never delivered a message to Jeff Sessions. That's what you said in there, right? You were asked to deliver that message. Isn't that correct, sir?
I believe that's accurate compared as it comprised in the report, yes. But the meeting never transpired.
And you said, sir, you never did anything other than what was completely legal. And you said that, sir, because you knew if you delivered that message that told the Attorney General to instruct the special counsel to limit the investigation to exclude the president, that would not be legal. Isn't that correct, sir?
You know, Mr. Burke, I didn't have the privilege of going to Harvard Law School, and I'm not an attorney. So what I know is I didn't think at the time that the president asked me to deliver a message that anything was illegal about it. I didn't have the privilege to go to Harvard Law. So if you're telling me that in your opinion that would have been illegal, then that's your opinion to it. But I never assumed that, never thought about it at the time, and haven't thought about it now.
Sir, you did think about it.
What else have I thought about, Mr. Burke?
Sir, you are, let me ask you this question, sir.
Mr. Burke, what else have I thought about if you've just told me that?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. The witness doesn't get to ask questions. He gets to answer them.
You're not getting asked in this part either. Let me ask you, sir. You were asked about why you didn't deliver the message. You said you went on vacation for 2 weeks. Over a month after the president directed you to deliver that message to the Attorney General Sessions, you didn't deliver it, right? Because you met with the president a month later on July 17th. Is that correct?
I believe that's what the report says.
So you've been back from vacation for 2 weeks. You even went to Washington to meet with the president. Why didn't you deliver the message that the president asked you to deliver it unless you didn't deliver it because you knew it was improper to deliver?
Mr. Burke, it wasn't a priority.
For who?
For me.
It was a priority for the president, isn't that right?
You'd have to ask the president that question.
Didn't the president tell you it was a priority? Didn't he ask you at your second meeting in July, did you deliver the message yet to the Attorney General? Didn't he ask you that?
Mr. Burke, I can't disclose any conversations on in the Mueller report.
That is in the Mueller report.
Okay, where is that, please?
You testified.
What page is that on, sir, to refresh my memory?
Sir, let me ask you a question. Do you remember the president asking you that?
Could you please reference me the page number so I can review it?
Sir, did the president ask you if do you remember testifying earlier that you said the president said if Mr. Sessions will not meet with you for you to deliver that message, you should tell him he's fired, correct?
Again, if there's a reference to the report, I'd like to refresh my memory. It's been a long day.
Sir, how about
I'm sure you appreciate that.
How about if I reference you to your testimony? Do you recall testifying to that earlier today?
Again, it's been a long day. I believe it to the best of my knowledge that that's what I said, but if there's a reference to the Mueller report, I ask you to point it to me.
So let me ask you, sir, if it wasn't a priority for you to deliver the message, why did you enlist Mr. Dearborn to deliver the message for the president?
Again, I can't speak to private conversations I would have had with Mr. Dearborn at the advice of counsel.
Not asking private conversations. The fact that you did it is already disclosed in the report. I'm asking you, why did you do it? Why? What's going on?
I knew Mr. Dearborn.
Why did you do it?
Can I answer now?
Please.
Okay, I've known Mr. Dearborn since his tenure as the Chief of Staff to Senator Sessions. He was my primary point of contact for Jeff Sessions during the Trump campaign. And I also knew that Mr. Dearborn had continued, like I did, to have a long-standing relationship with Jeff. And if I wasn't going to be seeing Jeff, I figured Rick would be able to deliver that message.
Well, sir, did you try to see Mr. Sessions again? Did you call him after the president told you to do it and see if he would meet with you this time? Did you call him once? Please answer the question.
Not to the best of my recollection.
And, sir, is the reason you personally didn't call him, someone who you said you were friendly with, was because you knew what the president asked you to do was wrong, and you, sir, didn't want to get in trouble. That's why you didn't do it.
You know, Mr. Burke, I've asked and answered that question. I'm not a lawyer, but I didn't think that he was asking me to do something that was unlawful at the time, and I don't think that was the case now.
Sir, and didn't Mr. Dearborn tell you that he actually had handled the situation and had delivered the message?
I don't recall that conversation, but it's possible.
Let me show you what Mr. Dearborn told the special counsel. He said that he had told you that he had handled the situation, but he had not actually followed through. Do you recall that, sir?
I don't know if I recall that conversation with Mr. Dearborn.
Sir, let me now ask you why the president thought you might be prepared to deliver a message that everyone in his administration that he asked refused to deliver. Sir, am I correct that a few weeks before you met with the president in June of 2017, you had a conversation with his senior staff about joining the administration in a very senior role?
I'm sorry, the question was in which time frame?
A few weeks before you met with the president the first time in June of 2017, and he asked you to deliver a message to the Attorney General.
And the question is what, sir?
That you had discussions with the president's senior staff about joining the administration in a senior role.
I can't speak to conversations I may not have with senior staff members of the administration to preserve the privilege which they've invoked.
So it's such a sacred privilege, you would not disclose private communications because that would be wrong. Is that your testimony, sir?
No, my testimony is that the White House has directed that I not disclose the substance of any discussions with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch confidentiality. And I recognize that's not my privilege, but I am respecting the decision of the White House.
Well, sir, didn't you publish a book in which you disclosed these very conversations you had with senior White House officials?
Which book do you reference? I've written 2 New York Times bestsellers in a year, so could you refresh my memory which one?
I'm asking you about the bestseller, Let Trump Be Trump.
That was a hell of a book, by the way. Yes, I did write that book.
And you disclosed it.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I request that the chair order the witness to answer the question.
I did answer the question. I wrote Let Trump Be Trump. Available at fine bookstores everywhere is my guess.
Let me ask you about, do you recall, sir, let me show you some things you wrote in your book. Do you recall you met at the White House, right, in late May 2017? Do you recall that?
I do recall meeting then with Mr. Trump in the Oval Office in late May of 2017. Yes, I do.
And let me show you, sir. Here's what you wrote. You wrote, and that was just after his first trip abroad as president, correct?
I don't know his travel schedule as well as you do, but it's possible.
Let me show you what you wrote, sir. Multiple times during his trip abroad and even during the plane ride home, the boss talked about bringing us in to restore order to the West Wing. Is that what you wrote, sir?
I mean, it looks like I wrote it.
And you recall, sir, that before you met with the president, his chief of staff, Reince Priebus, and his senior advisor, Steve Bannon, described what kind of role you were being considered for. Do you remember that, sir?
I can't discuss private conversations with the senior staff. Mr. Burke, I've answered that many times.
I know you can't discuss it, but you can write about it. So let's look at what you wrote about it, sir. We could go.
You should buy the book. It's very good.
Let's look at it. So, Corey Lewandowski, per their plans, you wrote, and this was the plans Mr. Priebus and Bannon shared with you, was going to oversee political operations, presidential appointments, and the RNC, as well as the campaign's handling of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. He would be on the same level as Jared, a senior advisor. Was that true, sir, what you wrote there, that they were talking about you in late May joining the position and playing that role?
The book is accurate.
And, sir, if you keep going on, if we could go what you met with the president, and the president said he didn't want to do it right now, meaning when you met with him, because if the place isn't working better in the next 4 or 5 weeks, I'm firing everyone. Is that correct?
Again, I believe the book is accurate.
Now, and you thought this was an incredible opportunity, as you wrote, right? Like a little kid in Little League getting to play in the World Series, correct? That's what you wrote?
Yes, having the privilege to be inside the Oval Office speaking to the President of the United States after growing up poor in Lowell, Massachusetts, not attending Harvard or graduating Phi Beta Kappa from Duke, yeah, it's a pretty amazing opportunity.
And, sir, and you knew for for Donald Trump as president or candidate that, as you wrote next, loyalty is the currency of the realm, and nothing hurts him deeper than when someone he trusts is disloyal. Is that correct?
I believe that's in the book.
So when he asked you a few weeks after this meeting to deliver this message as a non-government employee to the Attorney General, you knew that you were being considered for a senior position on the same level as Jared Kushner, and you also knew how the president values loyalty. Isn't that correct?
No, sir.
You deny that those conversations happened that you just talked about?
No, sir.
And that was weeks before you met with the president, correct, sir?
I met with the president in late May, as the book detailed accurately.
And, sir,
but you also read the rest of the paragraph, which said, we don't want you to come in at this time because if it doesn't work out, I'm going to fire everybody.
He said now, but he was dangling the position of the most senior level for you. Isn't that correct?
That's a question for the President of the United States, sir.
And he would know that he dangled it, and therefore you would do his bidding in delivering a secret message to the Attorney General that everyone in his government who he asked to deliver wouldn't do it. Isn't that correct?
No, sir.
All right, sir, well, let me ask you about this role you were going to have. Because if we could show you another quote that you wrote of how this role was described, part of your duties, if we could go to the next slide, please. Part of the duties, as Reince Priebus said, Corey is going to come in and run the Russia investigation. So is it true, sir, that you were being told you were considered to come in to run the investigation of the Russia's influence of the 2016 presidential campaign just weeks before you were asked to tell the Attorney General to limit the special counsel's investigation to future elections? Is that true, sir, that you were asked to come in, you were being considered to come in and run the Russia investigation? Is that a true fact, sir?
It's true that that's what Mr. Priebus wanted, yes.
And sir, what did you understand your role would be? That the president was going to bring in his former campaign manager until June of 2016 when he fired you to run the investigation of whether Russia influenced the 2016 campaign and did something improper with the Trump campaign? Is that what your understanding was, sir?
That's a question for what Mr. Priebus's understanding was.
Well, what I want to know, sir, is the president would know when he asked you to deliver the message to the Attorney General to tell the special counsel not to investigate the 2016 campaign, that you, sir, were under consideration yourself to be brought in by the president to run the very investigation of the 2016 campaign and Russian interference that you had previously been involved in. Isn't that correct, sir?
Not to the best of my knowledge, no.
Sir, you were not, it was not raised with you that you were going to be considered to run the Russia investigation?
That was Mr. Priebus's idea, not the president's idea.
And Mr. Bannon, correct?
I don't know if Mr. Bannon was involved in that. It's possible.
And the president, prior to your meeting, had discussed with you how much he wanted you to come join the administration just prior to that meeting as he was on his trip, on his way back. Isn't that what you said, sir?
No, I didn't speak to him while he's overseas.
On his way back, he raised that issue. Isn't that true, sir? That's what you wrote.
I don't believe I said that I spoke to the president while he traveled back from overseas.
Did he raise with you joining the administration before that meeting, sir?
I've spoken to the president and president-elect multiple times about opportunities, but I can't divulge those conversations. I'm sorry.
Well, you already did in your book, sir. You've already said that those conversations happened and were true, correct?
And what I stated was that was Mr. Priebus's idea, not the president's idea.
But, sir, you also wrote, and we just read it, that multiple times during his trip abroad and even during his plane ride home, the boss talked about bringing us in to restore order to the White House. Didn't you write that, sir?
If that's what the book says, I don't have it in front of me.
Yes, it does.
Okay, I'd like to see that so I can verify the validity of it.
Let's put the slide back. You know, we're not going to take the time. We saw the slide earlier. Let me continue, sir. Sir, let me ask you a question. You were asked about, you knew that the special counsel report found, systematic interference by Russians in the election, correct?
I'd like to restate I've never read the special counsel's report.
Sir, do you take the report lightly? Do you think it's not a serious matter what the special counsel did?
If you're putting words in my mouth, those are inaccurate. Never have I stated that.
Sir, did you know you were mentioned in there like 129 times, correct?
Is that accurate, 129 times, sir?
Do you know how many times?
I do not know. Do you?
Sir, isn't it true that just last week you were appearing at an event to autograph copies of the special counsel report, and you said you couldn't sign every page because you were mentioned in it so much?
No, I think that's a misrepresentation of what someone else said.
Did you go to an event where you signed copies of the special counsel report, sir?
I did attend a book signing where the report was available, but I never read the report.
And I ask you again, sir, do you make light of the special counsel's finding of Russia's role and attempt to try to interfere with the 2016 election?
I'm outraged at your characterization of my statements. Never have I said that. Never have I called into question the validity of the Mueller report or alluded to the fact that I wanted to see Russia interfere with the elections. As a matter of fact, my testimony here today has been completely the opposite of that. So for you to intimate that that's what my statement is about the Mueller report is grossly out of line.
Sir, let me show you something in the Mueller report that you had agreed to sign at an event. If we could go to the next slide, please. Sir, so you asked about that this is the findings. You don't just have any reason to dispute the findings that Mr. Sessions was recused from the investigation and wasn't allowed to participate, do you?
I have no idea what the findings of the report were. I have not read the report as I've testified to now on dozens of occasions here today.
Let me go to the next slide. You see where this says, you were asked about it, the special counsel concluded that taken together, the president and his campaign, the purpose of the message was to have you tell the Attorney General to move forward with investigating election meddling for future elections. Do you have any basis to dispute that conclusion by the special counsel in his report, sir, about your conduct?
Again, I've answered this question, asked and answered.
I would ask you to answer it, sir.
Gentleman will answer the question whether he's answered it before or not.
I have stated, to the best of my knowledge, most of the information in the Mueller report is accurate.
The gentleman's time has expired. Without objection, the minority will designate a staff member to conduct its questioning during the allotted time for staff.
That's me. And adjoining to your wide-ranging definition of staff, I'm staff.
You are not staff.
Yes, I am.
You are not staff. Just like
Lofgren's own definition, interns, people, I'm staff.
you are not staff, you are a member, and just as we are not permitting any member of the majority to go beyond the 5-minute rule.
Okay, I'm not going to interrupt.
We will not. I'm not going to permit a half an hour now for minority members beyond what they had under the 5-minute rule. If you have a staff member, you'll designate him. That's what, or her. That's what the rules call for. And if not, we'll adjourn.
I wish that you had actually designated a staff member. That would have been nice.
Did.
But, Mr. Chairman, you're really, right now, with everything rolling, cameras rolling, you're going to deny a member of Congress, the ranking member of this committee, this time. And I know you got willing accomplices in a majority. That's fine, because you have the most votes. You can do it.
Stop.
But,
Mr.
Are we really coming to this point, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman
30 minutes.
Gentleman will suspend. The rules of the committee provide for members of the House, or members of the committee, I should say, for members of the committee to question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. We've done that. The rules of the committee, as amended by the procedures adopted last week, permit the majority and the minority each to designate a staff member to examine the witness for 30 minutes. If you wish to designate a staff member, you may do so. A member of the House is not a staff member.
Give me just a moment. I am thinking about my designation, but you will possibly, hopefully, give me a moment after we've been running.
The House will stand in recess for 1 minute while the gentleman considers his appointment.
Mr. Chairman, I did not ask for a recess.
You wanted a minute.
No, I did not. I said, I'm thinking about it as I talk to you. I mean, because your definition of staff, anybody walking along this, according to Zoe Lofgren's statement, I could make a guy walk across my intern and their staff. You said interns. They're not paid. Here's the folks. Take the picture. You just see the railroad. This is amazing. I'll take my minute, and I may take 3 minutes to figure out this.
Just so everybody is clear, we are in a 1-minute recess.
Mr. Chairman, while we're in that recess, I wonder if you could indulge a question, just out of curiosity.
Yes, correct.
Committee will reconvene. Without objection, the minority will designate the staff member to conduct this questioning during the allotted time for staff.
Mr. Chairman,
Staff member.
Mr. Chairman, after deliberation and looking at this, I cannot go along with the chairman's sham and the majority's sham in this hearing and designating the staff member. We have said all along, this is not an impeachment inquiry. This is not something that should have happened to start with. I refuse to go along with the chairman's faux impeachment process. So we are at this point. So we're not going to designate. We'll continue to litigate this on other fronts. But, Mr. Chairman, you
Very
have made
well.
a shame of this committee today.
Mr. Chairman,
Very well.
parliamentary inquiry.
This completes
Mr. Chairman,
the questioning
Mr. Chairman,
of Mr. Lewandowski for today.
Mr. Chairman,
We thank our witness for participating.
Mr. Chairman, can you
In light
hear
of his-
me? Can you hear me now?
Oh, all right, I'll recognize
Thank
a parliamentary
you.
inquiry. If it's
Parliamentary,
about-
I just want to be
for what
sure.
purpose- for
I
what
just want to
purpose-
be sure I understand the rules correctly.
for what
Parliamentary
purpose does-
inquiry.
Just a minute. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Correctly.
I'm talking to you, Mike. I can't hear you.
Minutes.
Say again?
As duly elected members of this committee and as elected members of the House of Representatives, each of us is limited to 5 minutes.
That's correct.
But an unelected consultant is allotted 30 minutes in open hearing. Is this correct? That's what our rules.
The rules of the committee, as amended by the committee vote last week, provide that members of the House, of the committee, that is, have 5 minutes apiece to question witnesses.
So members of the House.
The rules of the committee also, as amended last week, also provide a half an hour per witness for counsel, for staff questioning of the witness, 30 minutes for the majority and 30 minutes for the minority staff. Those are the rules of the committee.
So members of the House are now subordinate to hired consultants.
That's not a parliamentary inquiry.
And that is true.
This completes the questioning of Mr. Lewandowski for today. We thank our witness for participating. In light of his repeated assertions of privilege, I will take those matters under advisement, and we will recess the hearing subject to the call of the chair until a later date.
Mr. Chairman,
The
we're
hearing will
going to
now
be,
stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.
Mr. Chairman, we're going to be submitting a letter to the chair with a couple of areas of clarification once the hearing is done.